Welcome to the Friday Night Campfire Stories. My name is Rob and I will be your host for this evening. If you're new here, this is my series where I share a chapter from one of my original stories each and every single Friday. For the past 8 Fridays, we've been experiencing my story, Astral. Astral follows Callum, who is in his 20s, living in Nashville, Tennessee, and ever since he was a little boy, he's had this reoccurring dream that at the beginning really spooked him, being like an 8-year-old kid. But as he's gotten older and had the same exact dream night after night after night, he's kind of getting to the point that's just kind of annoying and he's over it. That is until one night that we experience here in this story that changes everything and opens a realm to the world that we live in and opens up a whole new world of possibilities. It is a sci-fi original thriller series that is going to leave you breathless until the very last second. So it's one that you're not going to want to miss. If you weren't here for the release of every single chapter, well, you are in luck. Today, we will be experiencing the entire story from start to finish. And so, obviously, you can tell by the length of this video, it's going to be pretty long. So be sure to get comfortable or throw this on for a flight or maybe a long car ride. Or if you're just looking to settle in for the night and have something to do for the next few hours, then get ready, grab your snacks, grab your drinks, and let's get into it. Let's waste no more time. This is my story, Astral.
The hum of the city outside Callum's apartment window was distant, muffled like a radio left on in another room. Nashville's nightlife thrummed below, but in his small studio, the world was still. Callum Vane lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, waiting for sleep to take him. He hated this part of the night, the moments just before slipping into the inevitable monotony of his recurring dream. He turned over, punching his pillow into a more comfortable shape. The clock on his nightstand blinked 12:03 a.m. in red LED light, a faint irritation in the otherwise darkened room. "Here we go again," he muttered to no one but himself, his words barely more than a sigh. Sleep came quickly. It always did. And with it, the dream. Callum's eyes opened. He was no longer in bed but sitting in a wooden chair at the foot of it, his legs crossed and hands resting on the chair's arms. The room was bathed in a soft, silvery glow, its source unclear but omnipresent. Everything looked the same: the scratched hardwood floor, the pile of laundry in the corner, the faint shadow of the clock's red light reflecting against the wall. Everything except himself. His body lay still in the bed, breathing deeply, chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of sleep. The blanket was slightly askew, one arm draped over the edge. It was an image Callum had seen 1,000 times before, so vivid and real it felt like watching a live feed of his own unconsciousness. But it wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was the dream. The same dream he'd been having since he was a kid. A younger version of himself might have thought it was cool, even exciting. But now it was infuriating. He leaned forward in the chair, propping his elbows on his knees, and rested his chin in his hands. "Why?" he asked aloud, though he didn't expect an answer. He never got one. For years, he had tried to make sense of it. He'd scoured forums online, looking for explanations about recurring dreams, lucid dreaming, sleep paralysis, anything that might fit. Therapists had told him it was anxiety, a manifestation of some subconscious desire or fear. That hadn't helped. Every night, without fail, he ended up here, watching himself sleep like some kind of spectral babysitter. He let out a frustrated groan, rocking back in the chair. "I'm over it. Do something new already," he muttered to the dream itself, as if it were listening. Nothing changed. It never did. To make things even worse, he had forgotten to turn the TV on before falling asleep. Usually he would do this to give his dream self something to do throughout the night. The minutes dragged on, though time in the dream was fluid, slippery. It could feel like hours or mere moments before the familiar blare of his alarm clock would pull him back to consciousness. He glanced at the version of himself on the bed, his face slack with sleep, and clenched his fists. How could a dream feel so vivid yet be so utterly uneventful? He tapped his foot against the floor, his patience wearing thin. Then, on a whim, he tried something he hadn't done in years. He moved. Not just shifted in the chair, but actually stood up. To his surprise, it was easy. His legs obeyed without hesitation, as if he'd always had the ability but had never thought to use it. His heart raced, a strange mix of exhilaration and fear. He took a tentative step toward the bed, then another. Standing beside his own sleeping form was unnerving. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the blanket, but didn't touch it. Something about the sight of his own hand in the glow of the dreamlight unsettled him. It wasn't quite solid, almost translucent. Callum pulled back, glancing around the room. A new thought crept into his mind. If I can move, what else can I do? His eyes drifted to the small television on the opposite side of the room, its remote sitting on the cluttered coffee table. If nothing else, maybe some background noise would make the dream less unbearable. He walked over, each step feeling lighter, less tethered. Picking up the remote, he aimed it at the TV and clicked the power button. The screen flickered to life with a harsh burst of static, the volume cranked to its maximum. A cacophony of sound erupted, shaking him out of his focused state. Callum jumped, fumbling with the remote, but the noise had already done its damage. His sleeping form stirred. The body on the bed shifted, groaned, and then bolted upright, eyes wide and panicked. Callum froze, the remote slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. He watched as his physical self slapped the nightstand, searching for the source of the noise. The real Callum's breathing was ragged, his hair sticking up in disarray. "What the hell?" the waking Callum mumbled, running a hand down his face. He glanced around the room, his eyes scanning for something out of place, but there was nothing. Nothing except the now muted TV casting a faint blue glow. Awareness hit him like a wave. He and the waking Callum were not separate entities. They were one, split only by the boundaries of consciousness. The two could not coexist. As the waking Callum rubbed his temples, the projection flickered like a fading signal. The translucent form seated in the wooden chair wavered, the light of the room dimming as it dissolved. Within moments, the dream was gone entirely, leaving only the real Callum to exist in the quiet stillness of his apartment. He sat back on the bed, staring at the muted television, his mind racing. He didn't know what had just happened, but one thought kept echoing in his head. This was new. Morning light seeped through the thin curtains, drawing Callum's attention to the dull hues of the city skyline outside his window. With a sigh, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed and ran a hand through his messy, dark brown hair. His reflection in the mirror across the room showed a man in his mid-20s, lean but not athletic, with sharp features and perpetual shadows under his deep-set blue eyes. He scratched at the stubble lining his jaw, debating if it was worth shaving today. It wasn't. Callum wasn't the type to draw much attention. He preferred it that way. His wardrobe was an unremarkable collection of plain t-shirts, flannels, and jeans, all functional and low maintenance. Today's choice was no different. A gray shirt and a worn denim jacket that had seen better days. He liked it, though. It felt like him. After a quick breakfast of cold cereal and coffee, Callum grabbed his messenger bag and headed out. The city greeted him with its usual cacophony of honking cars and distant music spilling out of bars. His apartment building, a mid-century relic nestled between a boutique and a corner coffee shop, was nothing fancy. It had a charm, though, and it was close enough to his job that he could walk. Callum worked as an assistant at a small publishing house downtown. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave him a quiet sense of pride. Most days were spent sorting manuscripts, proofreading and fielding calls from frustrated authors. It wasn't the dream job he'd once imagined, but it was steady. It afforded him his modest life in the heart of the city, with just enough left over for a weekend beer or the occasional splurge on new books. The walk to work was brisk and familiar. He passed by a string of storefronts and street performers, nodding to the barista at the coffee shop on the corner, who always seemed to be working. As he approached the nondescript brick building that housed the publishing house, Callum felt the faint hum of routine settle over him. Another day, he muttered under his breath, pushing open the door and stepping inside. For now, at least, it was just another ordinary day. At the office, it was his usual day of mundane work. Lots of proofreading along with a phone call from this one old author who called in every day questioning something about his book and why they didn't use a different shade of orange on the cover or whatever he was on about that day. Callum often felt like his dream self while at work, just existing. He always received high remarks, though, from colleagues and his higher-ups. After work, Callum often would go to eat at his favorite restaurant. Nestled on a quiet corner just a few blocks from Callum's apartment, Copperhearth Bistro is a cozy, unassuming spot that exudes a rustic charm. The exterior is a blend of brick and weathered wood, with soft, glowing string lights hanging over the entrance, inviting patrons inside. The restaurant's name is etched on a brass plaque near the door, giving it a polished but understated touch. Inside, the space is warm and intimate. The walls are lined with reclaimed wood and accented with copper fixtures, from the sconces casting a soft amber glow to the mugs hanging above the small bar. A fireplace crackles in the corner during cooler months, adding to the bistro's welcoming atmosphere. The tables are a mix of polished oak and mismatched chairs, creating a homey, lived-in feel. Copperhearth is known for its eclectic yet approachable menu, specializing in Southern comfort food with a modern twist. Callum's go-to dish is the honey-glazed hot chicken and cornbread waffles, a perfect mix of sweet, spicy, and savory that's become a staple of his dinners. He often pairs it with a tall glass of sweet tea or their signature blackberry lemonade. The portions are hearty but not over the top, served with a thoughtful presentation that shows attention to detail without being pretentious. The bistro is run by a cheerful couple, Maggie and Ben, who greet Callum by name whenever he walks in. Maggie handles the front of house, always quick with a warm smile and a kind word, while Ben mans the open kitchen, often waving with a spatula in hand as regulars enter. The restaurant is rarely packed, but it hums with the lively conversation of locals who treat it like a second home. For Callum, Copperhearth isn't just a place to grab a bite. It's a retreat, a sanctuary from the noise of downtown life. Whether he's catching up with a friend, diving into a good book, or simply enjoying the quiet hum of the space, this little corner of Nashville feels like a slice of home. During his dinner, he would often just scroll endlessly through his phone. However, tonight, he had something on his mind. It was his dream from the night before. How did he stand up? How did he grab the remote and turn the TV on? These questions pondered his head through the entire meal, finally soaking in all of the information and realizing how crazy it was that had happened the previous night. He physically grabbed the remote and turned the TV on while he was fast asleep in his bed. He started thinking maybe it was just sleepwalking and he didn't realize it. But how was he watching himself sleep every night then? Either way, Callum, for the first time in a long time, was ready to sleep tonight. He wanted to test out his new ability in his dream. If he could stand up and turn the TV on, what else was he capable of doing? After dinner, Callum would walk the streets of Nashville, getting the little exercise that he would do. He was always in love with the views of the city, walking along the Cumberland River and looking at all of the scenery it had to offer on this lovely spring day. After walking for a few miles, he arrived back at his apartment complex. He would begin his unwinding process for the night. This resulted in watching his new favorite show for a couple of episodes. However, this was cut short tonight because of how excited Callum was to fall asleep. He would take a quick shower and then hop into bed with a giddy smile on his face, ready to explore this whole new world that he had been missing out on by not even trying to move for so many years. This became a challenge, though, because with all the excitement as well as the early bedtime, Callum was unable to sleep. He tossed and turned, trying to get comfortable, but was unable to do it. His mind, buzzing with thoughts about what he was going to do as soon as he fell asleep, made it so he couldn't sleep. Getting more frustrated, his mind started drifting back to all of the days when he would fall asleep as soon as his eyes shut. He remembered the first time that he had this dream. When Callum was 9 years old, shortly after moving in with his aunt following the tragic death of his parents, he had his first experience with the recurring dream. It happened on a stormy night in late autumn. He had been lying in a guest bed too large for his small frame, surrounded by the unfamiliar smells of his aunt's house and the muffled creaks of the old building. The weight of grief and change pressed down on him as he drifted to sleep. In the dream, he found himself sitting at the foot of his bed, looking back at his sleeping form. The silvery glow of the dreamlight illuminated the room, soft but unnatural, making everything appear sharper than it did in waking life. At first, Callum thought he was floating above his body, an out-of-body experience like something he had once seen in a cartoon. But when he looked down, he saw that he was solid, seated in a wooden chair that didn't exist in reality. He was paralyzed with fear, convinced he was dying, that this dream was his soul leaving his body for good. Tears pricked his eyes as he stared at his own face, pale and unmoving, the slight rise and fall of his chest, the only reassurance he wasn't already gone. He called out to himself, his voice echoing hollowly in the stillness, but the body on the bed didn't stir. He tried to run, to escape the suffocating feeling of separation, but his legs wouldn't respond. He was frozen, forced to sit and watch, helpless. When he woke up the next morning, his heart was pounding, and his throat was sore from screaming into the void of the dream. He ran to his aunt, babbling about how he thought he had almost died. She held him tightly, smoothing his hair and assuring him it was just a bad dream, a trick of his grieving mind. But the reassurance didn't last. The dream came back the next night, and the next, and every night after that. At first, he dreaded falling asleep, terrified of the lifeless reflection of himself he was forced to watch. He tried staying awake as long as possible, but his young body always gave in to exhaustion. It took years for him to stop fearing the dream, and even longer to stop believing it was some sign that he was cursed or broken. By the time he was a teenager, the fear had dulled into frustration and boredom, but he never stopped wondering why it started or what it meant. That first night, however, set the tone for his relationship with the dream, an uneasy coexistence with something he didn't understand but couldn't escape. Callum still laid awake for hours, trying too hard to fall asleep but being unable to. He then heard a noise coming from outside of his apartment. It was a scream. The lady's scream caused Callum to run over to his balcony and look down. There was a woman whose purse was being taken by a man in a hood who also had a knife. Callum didn't think twice as he bolted out of his apartment and down to the street. The robber finally yanked the purse away from the older lady. He started to walk away before anyone could stop him. At this point, Callum burst out the front door of the complex and used all of his frame to tackle the robber into nearby trash cans lying near the street. The robber must have hit his head or something because he became unconscious. Callum then grabbed the purse from the man and started walking back to the woman. Something didn't seem right though, because instead of being thankful, the lady looked worried or concerned. He finally made it back to her and handed her purse back to her. Expecting to hear a thank you or something, The woman instead let out a yelp of worry as she took her purse and began running in the other direction, away from Callum. He found this very strange, but, not questioning the situation, went back inside to try and finally fall asleep. He used the elevator to get back to the 4th floor and entered back into his apartment. Callum took one sip of water before heading back to his bedroom. However, something was out of place. Callum was already in his bed, fast asleep. The entire encounter was his dream self saving that woman from getting her purse stolen. Callum could feel the energy in the room as he felt a warm feeling. Not only did he take his dream self to the next level by moving, but he left his apartment. He couldn't believe that this was happening and questioned the reality of the situation. Callum debated with his dream self for a moment, but he had to know if it was true or not. He walked over to the TV and turned it on and turned it to full blast, waking his real self up once again. The real Callum jolted awake again and ran over to where the dream Callum dropped the remote and turned it off. He then proceeded to walk downstairs and out of his apartment complex. When he exited the building, the police were there with the man who had tried to rob the lady of her purse. It was at this moment that Callum knew it was real. His dream self had tackled that man and given the lady her purse back. This changed everything for Callum. If his dream state could do this, what else was he capable of doing? He was unable to sleep the rest of the night due to excitement. He started his day early, and his normal walk to work had more pep in his step. He was eager to learn about this new life that he would get to live. Callum coasted through work once again as always, but this time he had a smile on his face. He punched out at 5 o'clock on the dot and made his way to Copper Hearth Bistro. He ate his favorite meal. "You look happy today," Maggie, who had come over to speak with her most frequent customer, remarked. "Got a date or something tonight?" "You could say that," Callum replied with a grin before going back to finish his meal. After dinner, he took his normal walk around the city, soaking in the beautiful scenery that surrounded him. It was during this walk that he began planning his night. He could think of no better way to spend it than experiencing the nightlife while his physical form would be asleep in bed. Callum made it back to his home and started his nighttime routine. He knew the excitement would probably keep him awake, so he stopped by a local drugstore on his way home to buy melatonin. He took a few capsules as soon as he got back. By the time his routine was over, he was yawning constantly, ready to fall asleep standing up in the bathroom. He went to bed, and by the time his face hit the mattress, his dream self had already spawned in the imaginary chair that only existed in his dream. "Well, well," Dream Callum said to himself. "Where should we start?" He lifted himself from the chair and began walking around his apartment, touching random items, opening drawers, doing everything he could to realize that he was truly living a life through his dream. Then came the next test. Callum exited his apartment and started walking around the building. He called for the elevator and waited for it. When the elevator door dinged, it opened to reveal a man who appeared to be in his 30s. Callum gave him a head nod, the universal signal from one guy to another to say, "Sup." However, the man did not acknowledge him. Instead, he poked his head out of the elevator and looked in both directions before the door shut and the elevator began its descent. Callum stayed quiet on the way down until he heard a noise from the man standing next to him. It was a noise you didn't want to hear while trapped in an elevator. The man had passed gas, and the smell quickly suffused the confined space. "Really, dude?" Callum exclaimed. The man did not pay any attention to him. Callum was trapped in the gas chamber for what felt like an eternity before the door finally opened, allowing him to escape. "Asshole!" Callum shouted as the man walked in the other direction. He exited the building and quickly fell in awe of the view surrounding him. Nashville during the day was beautiful enough, but nighttime transformed it into a different world. The lights and sounds made him fall even more in love with the city. He took it all in and realized he could do whatever he wanted. He made his way down to Broadway, where he started people watching and taking everything in. It was surreal to him that he was doing all of this while in a deep sleep in his bed. He stopped into a bar he'd always wanted to visit, but it had always been too packed on weekend nights. Tonight, however, it was calm and relaxed. Callum debated getting something to eat, but thought twice about it. He wasn't sure if he could eat, or if he did, what would happen. He decided to just sit at the bar and enjoy the night. This turned out to be a smart choice, as he could see into the kitchen and notice the mess inside. Cockroaches and insects of all types filled the kitchen, while the cooks treated them as part of the staff. He felt sick thinking about people eating food prepared in such a filthy space. He decided he couldn't let this continue, no matter how successful the bar was. "Sir!" Callum called out to get the bartender's attention. The man was unresponsive. "Sir!" he yelled louder. The bartender didn't even flinch. Frustrated, Callum stood up and walked over to the bartender, getting right in his face. "Can I speak to a manager?" Callum demanded. Again, the bartender did nothing. As this unfolded, Callum saw a waitress walking out of the kitchen with a tray full of food. She took it to a table. Callum knew the food was likely contaminated, and he couldn't, in good conscience, let the patrons eat it. "Stop!" he screamed. Again, no one paid attention. "Don't eat that!" "This looks so delicious," one of the girls at the table said, taking out her phone to snap a picture for social media. Just then, the man sitting at the table grabbed his burger and inched it toward his mouth. Callum's instincts kicked in. He swatted the burger out of the man's hands and threw all the food on the table onto the floor. "Do not eat the food here," he shouted. "It's disgusting! You'll be paying more than the tab tonight if you eat here." The table's occupants were shocked. The man who was about to eat the burger stood up and walked toward Callum. But then something strange happened. The man walked right through him and leaned over to get the bartender's attention. "Sir, our food just fell onto the ground. Do you have a wobbly table or something?" the man asked. "Could we get another order?" "Sorry about that, sir," the bartender replied. "I'll get that right out to you." At that moment, Callum understood. He existed in a dream state, invisible to the waking world. He was real, but to everyone else, he was just a wisp of wind passing through. This explained so much: the lady with the purse and her reaction to a floating purse walking toward her, the guy in the elevator's obliviousness. Callum's actions in this state had no tangible consequences. He left the bar and started walking down the street, taking in the sights. He could do whatever he wanted and it wouldn't matter. His body was at home asleep. But Callum knew better. He had a strong conscience and no evil bones in his body. He was content with just existing in this dream state. Happiness washed over him as he realized he was no longer trapped in his room, staring at himself until his alarm went off. As the night wore on and the streets grew quieter, Callum found himself on a park bench near the AT&T building, often referred to as the Batman building. He gazed up at its illuminated spires, marveling at the architecture. While sitting there, he noticed a young man walking out front. The man looked no older than 20, with messy blonde hair and a pointy nose. Callum's attention was drawn to him, though he wasn't sure why. Then something strange happened. The young man looked around and locked eyes with Callum. This startled Callum, as no one had seemed aware of his presence until now. The young man's intense gaze made Callum think he could see him. Callum stood up and started walking toward him, taking slow steps at first. But as the young man's gaze intensified, Callum quickened his pace. Suddenly, the young man took off running. "Hey!" Callum shouted, now in a full sprint to catch up. The young man ran around the side of the building. Callum was only a few paces behind when he witnessed the impossible. The young man was flying. He soared at an alarming speed up the walls of the Batman building. Callum stopped in his tracks, stunned. Was this really happening? The young man kept ascending until he reached the top. Callum stopped right in his tracks to witness this. He couldn't tell if this was happening or not. The young man just kept flying up more and more until he reached the top of the building. Callum wasn't sure what to do or think of the situation. He was sure that the young man had seen him and acknowledged his existence. But how could this be? At this point, Callum had a theory. What if others had this same ability? Not only that, but if this was a dream, would he be able to fly or do anything he wanted as well? He wasted no time trying to jump off the ground and get to the top of the building to meet the young man. Callum bent down and then leaped up off the concrete. However, his normal jump would have gone up and then back down. But now, Callum appeared to not be going back down. He just kept climbing up and up more and more. He passed window after window of the building. The ledge of the top of the building was getting closer, and panic began to set in with Callum. He was so nervous to look down, but he knew he had to. He had to prove that he was actually flying. Facing his fears, Callum looked down to his feet, and sure enough, they were in midair with the ground hundreds of feet below. He was in awe of the situation, but was still nervous. He was unsure of how this was happening, but it was at that point that he could feel an unnerving amount of anxiety about the situation setting in. He didn't know how he was flying, but he also didn't know if he could take damage or worse, die. His arms began flailing as he approached the top of the building. He could feel his body starting to give up and noticed that he wasn't ascending as quickly as before. Callum reached out for the ledge and was able to grab on, but his body was now dangling at the top of the building. This was it. Callum was about to find out if dying in your dream truly meant dying in real life. He held on as long as he could, but could feel his hands starting to slip. As soon as his fingers were about to give up, he felt a pair of hands grab him by the wrist. He looked up, and it was the young man. He was now pulling Callum up onto the ledge, and when he rolled onto the hard floor of the roof of the building, he was finally safe. Gasping for air, Callum felt a sigh of relief enter his body. "Thanks," he said to the young man. "No problem," he replied. Callum was shocked to hear a reply from him. No one else could have heard him the entire night, and they couldn't see him either. But he could. Granted, no one else had flown up one of the biggest buildings in the United States as well. "You can use astral projection too?" asked the young man. Callum looked at him with questioning eyes. "What's that?" The young man looked shocked. "Wait, you can astral project, but you don't know what it is?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Callum said, concerned. "You've just flown, though," the young man responded. "That's advanced level stuff. You've got to be kidding, right?" Callum had no clue what was happening. He sat in silence for a moment, just shaking his head at the night that was now being disrupted by the sunlight. He felt a surge of panic realizing his alarm was about to go off, but he needed to ask this guy so many questions. "I'm about to wake up. Can you meet me back here tomorrow night?" Callum asked. "Tomorrow I'm supposed to be with the society," the young man answered, giving Callum little hope that he might figure out his feelings. "But if you meet me here tomorrow around 9:30, I can talk to you before I have to leave." 9:30? I'll be here," Callum exclaimed as a buzzing noise began to play like it was on a loudspeaker being broadcast through the entire city of Nashville. Just then, Callum jolted awake in his bed and quickly turned off his alarm. He laid in bed for a few more minutes replaying the events in his head. What was this world he was now part of? How had he flown? Who was this young man? And what was this society he was talking about? So many questions filled his head. All he knew was he had better get ready for work before he was late. What Callum didn't know was this night would change his entire world, for better and worse. He had unlocked a new realm to the world that he had been living in for the past 2 decades. And what lies ahead was not all it was going to be, what it was cracked up to be. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Callum sat at his desk, staring blankly at the manuscript in front of him. He blinked at the page. A paragraph of carefully edited prose stared back, defiant and unapologetic. He was supposed to be proofreading, meticulously combing through every line, yet the words blurred together like a foreign language he didn't recognize. For the first time in his life, work felt entirely insignificant. The events of last night played on repeat in his head, each moment more unbelievable than the last. The flying, the young man, the society. He had seen impossible things, and yet the strangest part was how real it all felt. More real than the mundane tasks, now waiting for his attention. He turned slightly to glance out the large office window. Nashville's skyline stretched far into the horizon, a pale blue haze of spring sunlight softening the city's edges. From here, Callum could almost make out the faint silhouette of the Batman building. The memory of dangling off the edge of its roof sent a shiver up his spine. Did that really happen? "Callum, you got a minute?" The voice jolted him back to reality. He spun in his chair to see his boss, Mr. Stevens, standing at the edge of his cubicle. Mr. Stevens was in his early 50s, with a receding hairline and a perpetual frown that suggested he hadn't smiled since 1998. Yeah, sure," Callum stammered, forcing himself upright. Stevens stepped closer, squinting at him as if sizing him up. "You okay? You look distracted." Callum opened his mouth to respond but caught himself. What could he say? "I astral projected out of my body last night, tackled a purse thief in my dream state, then flew up a skyscraper to meet a stranger who says I'm doing advanced level dream magic." "Just a late night," he said instead, offering a half smile. Stevens grunted, clearly unimpressed with the answer. "Well, don't let it interfere with your work. You've got a manuscript backlog. Get moving on the Peterson edits before noon." "Yes, sir." As Stevens walked away, Callum let his shoulders slump and sighed deeply. "Focus," he told himself. "Just get through the day." But it was a lie. He knew he wouldn't be able to focus, not with 9:30 looming like a promise on the horizon. The hours dragged by like molasses. Callum bounced between pretending to work and checking the clock every 5 minutes. At one point, he dropped his pen and spent a solid 10 minutes staring at it on the floor, mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. What's astral projection? What society was that guy talking about? And how did I manage to fly? The thought both terrified and thrilled him. Callum had spent years dreading his nightly dreams, trapped in the familiar silence of his room. But now there was a world beyond his imagination waiting for him. A world where he could fly, run, act without consequence. And possibly, he wasn't alone. For the first time, Callum felt awake. "Earth to Callum." The voice belonged to Carrie, his co-worker in the cubicle next to his. She peeked over the divider, a bemused expression on her face. Her brown curls framed her face, and she arched an eyebrow as she watched him. "You've been staring at your desk like it insulted your mother," she teased. "You good?" Callum blinked, shaking himself out of his stupor. "Yeah, fine, just tired." Carrie smirked. "Uh-huh. You look like you're plotting your escape. Big plans tonight or something?" He hesitated, a strange energy bubbling in his chest. "You could say that." "Well, try not to let Stevens catch you daydreaming. He's on the warpath." "Noted." Carrie ducked back down and Callum ran a hand through his hair, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Just a few more hours. By lunch, Callum had given up entirely on productivity. He sat alone at a corner table in the break room, poking half-heartedly at a sad sandwich he'd packed that morning. Around him, co-workers chatted about their weekends, their families, their meaningless lives that suddenly felt so small compared to what he'd glimpsed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. A text notification flashed on the screen. It was from an unknown number. "Meet me tonight. Don't be late." Callum's stomach flipped. He didn't need to guess who it was. The young man. His hands shook slightly as he slid the phone back into his pocket. It wasn't just his imagination. This was real. The young man knew he'd show up. The rest of the day was a blur. Pages went unread. Emails were left unanswered. Stevens gave him another disapproving look before leaving for the day, but Callum barely noticed. His mind was on the rooftop, on the secrets waiting for him at 9:30. By 5:01, he was out the door, walking fast enough to earn strange looks from pedestrians. The city bustled with its usual energy, but Callum barely saw it. He needed food, a shower, and time to prepare, because tonight, everything was going to change. Callum rushed home, his messenger bag slung over his shoulder and his mind racing with anticipation. The energy that had carried him through the day turned frantic as the hours felt both fleeting and endless. Just get to tonight, he told himself. When he pushed open the door to his apartment, he barely noticed the quiet hum of the city filtering through the window. Dropping his bag near the couch, he quickly went through his evening routine like a man on autopilot. Dinner was a joke. He stood in his kitchen, staring blankly into the fridge before settling on a leftover sandwich and a handful of chips. He ate standing up, not tasting a thing, glancing at the clock every other minute. Each time, disappointment hit him like a punch. 6:02 p.m., 6:14 p.m., 6:27 p.m. Finally, after cleaning up his uneaten dinner and pacing around the apartment a few dozen times, Callum flopped onto his bed with a sigh. His eyes flicked to the glowing red numbers on the digital clock. 6:30 p.m. "Seriously?" he muttered, throwing his arm over his face in exasperation. The sun was still glaring through the thin curtains, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. Birds chirped outside. People laughed somewhere on the street below. Callum groaned and rolled onto his side, pulling the blanket over his head as if that might make it dark enough to sleep. It didn't. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to drift off. "Come on, just fall asleep," he whispered, half begging himself. Nothing happened. The harder he tried, the more awake he felt. His body shifted restlessly, his mind refusing to quiet. He thought about the night before, about flying, about that young man with the knowing eyes and cryptic words, the society, astral projection. He didn't even know what that meant, but the weight of it felt monumental, as if it were some hidden truth about the world that had always been just out of reach. Callum tossed the blanket off in frustration and sat up. This is pointless. The clock read 6:58 p.m. The sun wasn't even close to setting, and there was no chance he'd be able to sleep while daylight poured through the window. With nothing else to do, Callum tried to kill time. He switched on the TV and flipped through channels without paying attention to any of them. News anchors droned about local events, sitcom characters laughed on cue, and cooking shows showcased impossible recipes Callum would never try. After a while, he turned the TV off entirely. It was only making him more anxious. By 7:20, he found himself pacing his apartment again. He picked up a book he'd been meaning to read for months, sat down on the couch, and stared at the first page for 5 minutes before tossing it onto the coffee table. The words didn't stick. He checked his phone. No texts, no calls. The clock mocked him again. 7:41 p.m. Unreal, Callum mumbled, rubbing a hand over his face. As the minutes crawled by, Callum's restlessness turned desperate. He needed to sleep. If he didn't fall asleep soon, he'd miss his chance. What if his body betrayed him and stayed awake until morning? The thought alone was unbearable. At 8 o'clock on the dot, Callum grabbed the bottle of melatonin he'd bought the night before and popped the cap off with shaky fingers. He poured a capsule into his palm, hesitated, then grabbed one more for good measure. He turned off the lights, brushed his teeth for a second time just to give himself something to do, and climbed back into bed. The room was dimmer now, the sunlight fading to a pale amber glow. Still, it wasn't completely dark, and Callum could see the faint shadows of his furniture against the walls. He stared at the clock one last time, 8:07 p.m. Callum lay perfectly still, breathing deeply, counting backward from 100 in his head like he'd read about online. The minutes felt like hours as his mind flitted from thought to thought, refusing to settle. What will he tell me? What if I can't get there? What if this is all just some weird, stress-induced hallucination? With each passing thought, the weight of the melatonin began to pull at him. His limbs felt heavier. The clock, now 8:34 p.m., grew fuzzier in the corner of his vision as his eyelids began to droop. Finally, Callum's breathing slowed. His body relaxed. The buzz of the city outside faded to a distant hum. The world went dark, and the chair appeared. The silvery glow welcomed Callum as he opened his eyes. The wooden chair beneath him felt familiar, as did the hum of stillness that filled the room. But tonight, he didn't waste a second. He stood, the anticipation bubbling inside him like a spark ready to ignite. Every nerve in his body seemed alive with energy as he made his way to the door and stepped into the hallway. The world outside his apartment felt eerily quiet, too quiet for a city like Nashville, but Callum didn't care. His focus was singular. He had to get to the AT&T building. The young man would be waiting, and Callum had to know more. The moment his feet hit the sidewalk, he broke into a brisk pace. The city stretched out ahead of him in all its late-night quiet. Streetlights glowed faintly above, their pools of light creating soft halos on the pavement. Everything looked normal, at least as normal as a dream could be. The only sound was his shoes tapping against the concrete, steady and rhythmic, but his mind was anything but calm. What is this society? How did I fly? And what else am I capable of? The questions looped endlessly, pushing him forward as if they had their own momentum. He turned a corner and picked up his pace. The AT&T building was only a few blocks away now, its dark spires looming in the distance. For the first time in years, Callum felt awake, truly awake, and the thought of what awaited him had his heart pounding. Lost in his thoughts, Callum barely noticed the deep rumble approaching from the side. The deafening blare of a semi-driving full speed ripped through the air, yanking Callum back to reality, just as a pair of headlights burst into view. A semi-truck roared toward him, its massive grille barreling down the street, mere feet away. Callum froze, his breath catching in his throat. There was no time to move, no time to think. And then his body melted. The world slowed as Callum's limbs softened like liquid wax. His vision blurred as he dropped to the ground, a shapeless, rippling pool of himself, slick and transparent as water. The truck roared over him, its tires skimming harmlessly across his formless body before it continued down the street, the sound of its engine fading into the distance. Callum's mind spun in disbelief. What just happened? He felt himself reforming, his legs solidifying, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Callum stared at his hands, now completely normal, as though nothing had happened. What the hell? He whispered to himself, his voice trembling. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He spun around, looking for any witnesses, someone who might explain how he'd survived. But even if there were, they wouldn't be able to see him. He ran a hand through his hair, stumbling a step backward before catching himself. Okay, okay, he muttered, trying to calm the trembling in his hands. Whatever had just happened defied reason. Callum didn't understand how or why he'd turned into liquid, but there was no time to figure it out now. His focus returned to the building. Get it together, he muttered. Keep moving. He forced himself forward, his steps heavier now, as if the weight of what had just happened were dragging behind him. The AT&T building loomed closer with every block, its spires cutting sharply into the night sky. Finally, Callum stopped at the base of the building, craning his neck upward. He squinted into the darkness, barely able to make out a figure leaning over the rooftop edge. "Callum!" the young man's voice rang out, clear and sharp. "Took you long enough? What are you waiting for? Get up here!" Callum blinked up at him, still shaken from what had just happened. He took a deep breath, the memory of flying last night flashing through his mind. The thought of it sent a rush of excitement through his veins. "You've done this before," the young man called down again, his voice teasing. "Don't overthink it. Just go." Callum clenched his fists, steadying himself. This time, he wasn't going to panic. "All right," he muttered, grinning despite himself. "Let's see if I can really do this." He bent his knees, feeling the energy build in his legs, and then pushed. The ground fell away beneath him in an instant. Callum soared upward, faster and smoother than before. The cool night air rushed past his face, and his heart pounded, not in fear, but in exhilaration. He passed window after window, the building's sleek surface blurring as he climbed higher and higher. The rooftop edge came into view, closer and closer, until he landed. This time his feet hit the ledge with confidence. He stumbled only slightly, grinning wide as he steadied himself. "I did it," he whispered, the disbelief in his voice giving way to triumph. "Well, look who figured it out." Callum looked up to see the young man standing a few feet away, his arms crossed and a smug grin on his face. The moonlight illuminated his features, messy blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, and that same cocky confidence Callum remembered from the night before. "You're a natural," the young man said, giving him an approving nod. "Told you it'd be easier this time." Callum couldn't help but laugh, still catching his breath. "Yeah, I guess I just had to believe I could do it." "Belief's half the battle," the young man replied, his grin widening. "But flying, that's just the beginning." Callum's smile faded slightly as he caught the weight behind those words. He stepped forward, his curiosity bubbling to the surface. "What do you mean? What is all of this? Who are you?" The young man turned to face the skyline, his expression suddenly more serious. He didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch between them. Finally, he spoke. "Where would you like me start?" Callum followed his gaze, his heart pounding all over again. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of what he didn't know. He was ready for answers on his new life. Callum stared at the young man, his breath finally slowing after the exhilarating flight. The night air felt cooler up here, sharper against his skin. Nashville sprawled out around them, the city lights twinkling like 1,000 stars. It felt so surreal, yet grounded, like this rooftop was the only thing tethering him to reality. The young man, the guy who saved me last night, Callum thought, turned to face him fully, his sharp blue eyes gleaming with intrigue. "So," Callum said, breaking the silence, "are you finally going to explain what's going on? Who are you?" The young man smiled faintly and extended a hand. "Reese." "Callum," he replied, shaking it firmly. "I know." Reese's smirk widened, and Callum blinked, thrown off balance by the comment. "What do you mean, you know?" "You're hard to miss, man," Reese said with a shrug, leaning back against a rooftop ventilation unit. "When someone new pops up like you did, word travels fast. especially when that someone doesn't play by the rules. Callum frowned. What rules? Reese cocked an eyebrow. We'll get there. Let's start with the basics. Do you even know what you're doing? Do you understand what's happening when you come here? Callum shoved his hands into his pockets. Not really. I've been dreaming like this for years, watching myself sleep. But lately, it's different. I can move. I can leave my apartment. I flew here. But it doesn't make any sense. Reese studied him for a long moment, as though deciding whether or not to believe him. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his messy blonde hair. All right, here's the deal, Reese said, pushing off the vent and beginning to pace. You're astral projecting. Your consciousness, your soul, if you want to get all spiritual about it, leaves your physical body when you sleep. Most people can't do it, and the ones who can, they don't even realize it's happening. It just feels like a dream, like they're floating above themselves, watching. Callum's brow furrowed. That's what I've been doing, for years. Exactly. Reese pointed at him, emphasizing the word. Most people stop there. Even if they do it night after night, they never leave the safety of their bedroom. They don't know how, or they can't break that tether. It's rare for someone to roam beyond their own house, let alone the entire city. Callum tilted his head, trying to process what he was hearing. So, you're saying there are other people who can do this? Oh, tons, Reese said with a nonchalant wave of his hand. But like I said, most never leave their room. The few who can, the ones who can explore the world like this, we're part of something bigger. What do you mean? Reese stopped pacing and turned to him, his expression more serious now. We call ourselves the Society. We're a group of astral projectors who've learned to use this ability to help people, to help the world however we can. Callum blinked. Help the world? Like superheroes or something? Reese barked out a laugh. Not exactly. We're not out here wearing capes or fighting supervillains. But think about it, Callum. When you're astral projecting, you can go anywhere. You can see anything. There are no doors you can't open, no walls you can't walk through. He paused, letting the words sink in. We use that ability to do good, however we can, find lost people, stop crimes before they happen, deliver messages to those who need to hear them, stuff like that. Callum's head spun with the possibilities. His mind raced back to the night before, tackling the purse thief and handing the woman back her bag. At the time, he thought it was just a dream. But now, it was real. He did stop a crime. That's incredible, Callum murmured. But why me? I don't understand why this is happening to me all of a sudden. Reese squinted at him like he was trying to see through him. Yeah, that's the part I don't get. What do you mean? I mean you're messing with me. Reese pointed at him again, accusingly. You have to be. No one learns to do what you're doing without help. Hell, it took me years to get good at this. And you're already flying? Callum frowned. I didn't exactly learn it, it just happened. That's what's messing me up, Reese exclaimed, throwing his arms in the air. You're skipping steps. Most people take months just to move a few feet beyond their bed. Years before they're doing anything crazy. Me? I didn't even leave my house for a year, and I sure as hell didn't fly until 2 years later. He crossed his arms, looking Callum up and down like he was some kind of science experiment. But you? You're just figuring it out like it's no big deal. You don't even know what astral projection is, and you're already flying up skyscrapers? It doesn't make any sense. Callum shifted uncomfortably. Well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm just doing what feels natural, I guess. That's the crazy part, Reese muttered, shaking his head. For most of us, this takes practice, years of training to get it right. But you're picking it up like you were born to do it. Callum stared at him, his mind still reeling. So what does that mean? Am I different? Reese shrugged. Don't know yet. but trust me, you've got talent. Raw talent. I don't say that lightly. Callum felt a strange mix of pride and unease at Rhys's words. He wasn't used to being good at something right away, especially not something as bizarre as this. So, what now? Callum asked cautiously. Rhys's grin returned, sharp and confident. Now, I start showing you the ropes. If you're going to be out here flying around like a pro, you might as well learn how to do it properly. The society's got rules, and if you're going to be one of us, you'll need to understand them. The society, Callum repeated, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. And they'll just let me join? Rhys chuckled. That depends on you, but from what I've seen so far, I don't think you'll have any trouble fitting in. Callum turned to look out over the skyline, the city stretching far into the horizon. The air was cool against his face, and the lights below seemed to pulse with a rhythm he'd never noticed before. A strange sense of purpose began to settle over him, like a piece of his life had finally clicked into place. Whatever this was, whatever he was, Callum knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same. Rhys stretched his arms over his head, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. All right, Callum, I've got a question for you. You ready to see something that'll really blow your mind? Callum blinked. You mean more than this? He gestured around at the rooftop and then to the vast city skyline. I thought flying and turning into liquid were pretty hard to top. Oh, trust me, Rhys said, cracking his knuckles. What you've seen so far, that's just the shallow end of the pool. There's a lot more out there. The question is, do you want to come with me to see it? See what? Callum asked, his curiosity sparking to life again. The Society's meeting place. We call it the Sanctum of Astralis. Callum couldn't help but feel the weight of those words settle over him. The name sounded ancient, mysterious, like it belonged in a book about secret orders and hidden worlds. The Sanctum, Callum repeated slowly, tasting the word. Where is it? Rhys shrugged. Not here, that's for sure. You're gonna have to fly for this one. Think you're up for it? Callum didn't hesitate. Lead the way. Rhys's grin widened. Attaboy. All right, stick close to me and try not to get distracted. It's a long way to go, and I'd rather not have to fish you out of a cornfield somewhere in Kansas. Callum raised an eyebrow. Kansas? Rhys ignored him and shot into the air without warning. Callum, startled but determined, bent his knees and pushed off, following Rhys into the night sky. The wind whipped past him, cool and exhilarating, as Nashville quickly fell away beneath them. Callum struggled to keep up at first, but his confidence grew with every second. The city lights shrank into glowing dots, and before long, they were soaring high above the clouds. Where are we going? Callum called out, his voice carried away by the wind. Chicago, Rhys shouted back. You'll see why soon enough. The flight was like nothing Callum had ever experienced. The world below was a blur. Towns, forests, and rivers zipped past, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The stars above felt impossibly close, as if he could reach out and grab them. The sheer scale of the world took his breath away. After what felt like only minutes, the glow of a new city appeared on the horizon. Skyscrapers stretched high into the air, their lights reflected in the shimmering waters of Lake Michigan. Chicago lay before them, alive and vibrant even in the dead of night. Almost there, Rhys called out, descending sharply toward the heart of the city. Callum followed, his excitement mounting as they soared over towering buildings and empty streets. They landed in an alleyway just outside of downtown, where the sounds of the city seemed strangely muffled. Callum looked around, confused. This is it? Patience, Rhys said, walking forward. He led Callum to an unmarked iron door set into the side of an old stone building. Vines and moss crawled up the walls, as if the structure had been here for centuries. unnoticed and forgotten. Rhys knocked 3 times, sharp and deliberate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep rumble, the door slid inward, revealing a narrow stone corridor bathed in flickering torchlight. "Welcome to the sanctum of Astralis," Rhys said, stepping aside with a flourish. Callum hesitated, his heart racing, before following Rhys into the corridor. The door closed behind them with a heavy thud, cutting off the outside world. The air inside was cooler, filled with the faint smell of earth and stone. The corridor opened into a massive underground chamber, and Callum stopped short, his mouth falling open in awe. The sanctum was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, lit by glowing orbs suspended in midair, casting a soft, silvery light across the cavern. Ancient stone pillars lined the walls, carved with intricate symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The center of the chamber featured a large, circular table made of polished obsidian, its surface reflecting the light like black glass. Around it, figures moved, their voices a low murmur of conversation. Callum could feel the weight of something powerful in the air, like the room itself was watching him. "Come on," Rhys said, nudging him forward. "Time to meet the others." As they approached the table, 3 figures stood waiting. Callum's breath caught in his chest as he took them in, each one commanding attention in their own way. Eldrin Kalis stood at the center, leaning on a gnarled wooden staff that seemed as ancient as the room itself. His long silver hair flowed past his shoulders, and his beard was just as white, neatly trimmed. Deep wrinkles lined his face, but his eyes, his piercing, pale blue eyes, were sharp and clear, brimming with wisdom and authority. He wore a flowing gray robe adorned with swirling golden patterns that seemed to shimmer in the torchlight. "Rhys," Eldrin said, his voice deep and calm, like rolling thunder. "You've brought someone new." "Yes, sir," Rhys replied, standing a little straighter. "This is Callum. He's different." Eldrin's gaze turned to Callum, pinning him in place. For a moment, it felt as though the old man could see straight into his soul. "We shall see." To Eldrin's left stood Talon Marrow, a tall, gaunt man with sharp, angular features and jet-black hair slicked back. His dark eyes seemed to burn with an intensity that made Callum uneasy, and the faintest of smirks curled his lips. He wore a fitted black coat that swept the floor, its high collar adding to his menacing appearance. Talon tilted his head slightly as he studied Callum. "This is the one you've been talking about?" he asked Rhys, his voice smooth but edged with skepticism. "Yeah," Rhys said, unbothered. "See for yourself." Talon's smirk widened ever so slightly. "Interesting." And then there was Vexa Druin. Callum's heart skipped a beat when he saw her. She stood to Eldrin's right, her presence a striking contrast to Talon's cold demeanor. Vexa was beautiful, beyond beautiful, really. Her hair fell in waves of midnight black, framing her sharp yet delicate features. Her eyes, an intense shade of emerald green, seemed to glow faintly as she regarded Callum with quiet curiosity. She wore a deep blue tunic cinched at the waist, paired with sleek black pants and knee-high boots that gave her an air of both elegance and strength. "Another newcomer?" she said, her voice soft but confident. There was something musical about it, something that made Callum forget how to breathe for a second. Rhys grinned and nudged Callum. "Pick your jaw up, man. She's way out of your league." Callum snapped out of it, his cheeks burning. Vexa smiled faintly, as though she'd seen this reaction 1,000 times before. "Welcome, Callum," she said, her eyes lingering on him for a moment before shifting back to Eldrin. Eldrin tapped his staff against the floor, the sound echoing throughout the chamber. "There is much to discuss." Callum swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze on him. Whatever he had stumbled into, it was bigger than he'd imagined. and it was only just beginning. Eldrin's staff tapped against the floor once more, the soft thud resonating through the sanctum. "The rest of our members will be arriving shortly. Tonight we'll see what you're capable of, Callum." Callum shifted nervously, stealing a glance at Reese, who gave him a reassuring nod. "You'll be fine," Reese whispered, his tone light. "Probably." A low rumble echoed through the chamber as another door swung open, and more members of the society entered, their figures emerging from the shadows one by one. There were 8 of them in total, an eclectic mix of men and women, each giving off an air of quiet power and confidence. Reese rattled off their names quickly as they settled around the room. "That's Freya, Oren, Darius, Xana, Lucan, Mira, Holt, and Quinn," he muttered. "Don't worry about memorizing them yet. They'll all know who you are soon enough." The other members regarded Callum with curiosity, some whispering to one another, while others gave approving nods or faint smiles. It was clear he was the center of attention, and he could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on him. Talon's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "All right, enough standing around. If the kid's going to be one of us, let's see if he can actually keep up." There was a dark gleam in Talon's eyes as he stepped forward, his black coat sweeping behind him like a shadow. Callum stiffened as Talon looked him over, his expression a mix of disdain and amusement. "You'll be training with me tonight," Talon said, his lips curling into a smirk. "Let's see what you've got." Eldrin gave a small nod of approval, his gaze lingering on Callum. "Very well. Talon, take him through the basics. Everyone else, observe." The training began with simple exercises, or at least they seemed simple at first. Talon led Callum into the center of the chamber, where an open space had been cleared. The other members formed a loose circle around them, watching intently. "First rule of astral projection," Talon said coldly. "Control. Without it, your gift is nothing but chaos." He snapped his fingers and the air shimmered. Suddenly, glowing orbs appeared around Callum, small, darting spheres of light that zipped unpredictably in every direction. "Catch one," Talon commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. "Shouldn't be too hard for someone like you." Callum stared at the orbs, their erratic movements dizzying. He reached out, but the lights darted away from his hand just before he could grasp them. Talon smirked, crossing his arms as if to say, "I told you so." "Focus," Callum muttered to himself. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he stopped reaching and moved, with intention, not hesitation. His hand shot forward, snatching an orb out of the air. It pulsed softly in his palm, and the others in the room let out murmurs of surprise. "Beginner's luck," Talon growled. "Let's make this harder." He waved his hand and the orbs multiplied, dozens of them now weaving through the air like fireflies on fast forward. Callum's eyes narrowed. Talon clearly wanted him to fail, but something inside him wouldn't let that happen. Instead of chasing the lights, Callum planted his feet and raised his hands. He felt the space around him, as though he were part of the dream itself. The lights responded, slowing as if drawn to him. With a final sweeping motion, he clapped his hands together, and the orbs collapsed into a single glowing light floating gently above his palm. The room was silent for a beat. "Whoa," Reese whispered. Even Talon looked taken aback, though he quickly scowled and turned away. "Lucky again," he muttered. The training continued, each challenge more difficult than the last. Talon conjured obstacles, created illusions, and threw everything he could at Callum to throw him off balance. At one point, a wall of fire appeared between Callum and the others, its heat so intense he thought it might burn him. "Walk through it," Talon ordered, his voice cold and unforgiving. Callum hesitated, but only for a moment. "It's not real," he whispered to himself, forcing his feet to move forward. Step by step, he pushed through the flames, ignoring the heat that licked at his skin. When he emerged on the other side, unscathed, the other members erupted into applause. "That's impossible," Talon said under his breath, his hands curling into fists. Vexa's emerald eyes lingered on Callum with admiration. She clapped gently, a faint smile playing on her lips. When Callum caught her gaze, his heart skipped a beat. She looked at him like he was something extraordinary, and for the first time in a long time, Callum felt it. By the end of the training, Callum was exhausted but triumphant. He'd surpassed every challenge Talon threw at him, though the dark-haired man's irritation was palpable. Eldrin approached him, his expression calm but approving. "You did well tonight, Callum. Better than I expected." "Thanks," Callum replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know how I'm doing this, it just happens." Eldrin studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You have a rare gift, Callum. Most of us struggle for years to learn what you've accomplished tonight. It's not just skill, it's instinct. You're special." Callum swallowed, unsure how to respond. "Special?" "Yes," Eldrin said, his voice kind but firm. "I want you to come back tomorrow night, alone. There are fundamentals we didn't cover tonight, things you need to learn if you're going to fully understand your gift." Callum nodded, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. "I'll be here." Eldrin smiled faintly and placed a hand on Callum's shoulder. "Rest well tonight. You've earned it." As the night began to fade and Callum waited for the familiar pull of his alarm clock, he stood near the edge of the rooftop, staring out over the sleeping city. Reese had already left, and the other members were dispersing, but Callum lingered, soaking it all in. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a figure. Talon stood near the entrance to the sanctum, his dark coat fluttering faintly in the wind. He wasn't smiling. Instead, his face was twisted into something darker, something malicious. His black eyes locked onto Callum, and for a moment, the world felt colder. Callum shivered. He couldn't prove anything, but he felt it. Talon was up to no good. The pull of his alarm hit him then, tugging at his consciousness like a hook. Callum's vision blurred, the rooftop melting away as reality crept back in. The last thing he saw was Talon's shadowed face, watching him with quiet hatred. The daylight hours felt suffocating. Callum sat at his desk, staring blankly at the glowing monitor in front of him. His screen displayed a half-finished spreadsheet, its rows and columns blurring together in a haze. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen, as his mind drifted far from the dull confines of his office. Last night played over and over in his head, the sanctum of Astralis, the glowing lights, the impossible abilities he'd unlocked, and, most vividly, Eldrin Kalis. The old man had barely spoken to Callum, but his words carried a weight that hadn't left him. Eldrin's voice, calm, steady, and wise, echoed in his thoughts. There had been a kindness in his gaze, but also a quiet intensity, as though he could see the potential Callum didn't even realize he had. Callum had never felt particularly special. He was good at his job, but not exceptional. He'd always been more of a background player, the kind of person people would describe as nice or dependable. Yet Eldrin's words had made him feel important, as if he belonged to something greater. And Callum wanted to belong. He wanted to impress Eldrin, to earn his approval, to rise to whatever unspoken expectations had been placed on him. Despite having only met him the night before, Callum couldn't help but look up to him as a mentor, a guide in a world he was only beginning to understand. "Callum." The voice yanked him out of his thoughts. He blinked and turned to see Carrie peeking over the divider of his cubicle, her brow furrowed in concern. "You've been staring at your screen for 20 minutes, she said. "Is everything okay?" Yeah, Callum replied quickly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just distracted." "Uh-huh," Carrie said skeptically. "Well, Stevens has been circling the floor like a shark. Might want to look busy before he smells blood. Callum grimaced. Thanks for the heads up. As Carrie ducked back into her cubicle, Callum forced himself to focus on his work. He typed aimlessly into the spreadsheet, entering placeholder data that made no sense but looked productive. The minutes dragged on, and his mind inevitably wandered back to the sanctum. He could almost hear Eldrin's voice again. You have a rare gift, Callum. A rare gift. The words sent a warm thrill through him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had said something so meaningful to him, if anyone ever had. Callum! The sharp voice made him jump. He looked up to see Mr. Stevens standing at the entrance to his cubicle, arms crossed and eyes narrowed. Office. Now. Callum's stomach dropped. Stevens' office was a cramped, windowless room that somehow managed to feel colder than the rest of the building. Callum sat across from his boss, who leaned back in his chair, staring him down like a judge preparing a verdict. Do you know why you're here? Stevens asked, his tone clipped. Callum swallowed. I've been a little distracted lately. I'll get back on track, I promise. Stevens scoffed. A little distracted? Callum, you've been half asleep at your desk for the past 2 days. Your output is slipping, your focus is non-existent, and frankly, it's starting to affect the team. I'm sorry, Callum said quickly. It won't happen again. Stevens didn't look convinced. He folded his hands on the desk and leaned forward. You're a good worker, Callum. Always have been. That's why I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt here. But consider this your warning. You're on thin ice. If I don't see improvement by the end of the week, we're going to have a much more serious conversation. Callum nodded, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. Understood. Stevens sighed and leaned back in his chair. Look, I don't know what's going on with you, but whatever it is, leave it at home. When you're here, I need you present. Got it? Yes, sir, Callum said, his voice barely above a whisper. Good. Now get back to work. Callum returned to his desk feeling deflated, but the weight of Stevens's words did little to dampen his thoughts of the society. He couldn't stop replaying everything in his head, the way the sanctum glowed with life, the awe in the other members' eyes when he'd surpassed every challenge, the look Vexa had given him that had made his heart race. And tonight, he would go back. Eldrin wants me there. The thought lifted his spirits, pushing the sting of Stevens' lecture to the back of his mind. For the first time in his life, Callum felt like he was part of something extraordinary, something that mattered. He glanced at the clock on his monitor. 2:13 p.m. Just a few more hours, and he'd return to the sanctum, ready to learn more, ready to prove himself. Just get through the day, he told himself. But as he stared at the spreadsheet in front of him, his thoughts wandered once more, lost in the possibilities of what tonight would bring. The afternoon passed in a blur of half-hearted work and stolen daydreams. By the time Callum clocked out, he felt a rush of relief and anticipation. He barely remembered the walk to Copperhearth Bistro, but he found himself seated at his usual table staring at his usual order, a plate of honey-glazed hot chicken and cornbread waffles. He poked at his food absent-mindedly, his thoughts consumed by the sanctum and Eldrin's promise to teach him more tonight. Eldrin had said Callum was special, but what did that mean? What could he accomplish if he fully embraced his gift? He ate quickly, eager to finish his meal and get home. The night came fast. Callum kicked off his shoes, tossed his jacket onto the couch, and barely took time to brush his teeth before climbing into bed. His heart pounded with excitement as he stared at the ceiling, willing himself to sleep. It didn't take long. The moment his eyes closed, the dream world began to take shape around him. The soft glow of his apartment faded, replaced by the familiar sensation of weightlessness. Without hesitation, Callum pushed off the ground, soaring into the night sky with a newfound confidence. The journey to the sanctum felt shorter this time, the wind rushing past him as the lights of Chicago came into view. He landed lightly in the alleyway outside the unmarked door, his heart racing with anticipation. The iron door opened for him without a sound, as though it had been waiting. Eldrin stood in the middle of the sanctum, leaning on his staff, his sharp blue eyes lighting up as Callum entered. "Punctual," he said with a nod. "I like that." Callum smiled, his nerves melting away in the older man's presence. "What's tonight's lesson?" Eldrin stepped forward, motioning for Callum to follow him into the chamber's center. The other members were absent, leaving the massive space eerily quiet. The glowing orbs overhead cast a soft light on the polished obsidian floor, their reflections dancing like fireflies. "Tonight," Eldrin began, his voice calm but firm, "we'll see how far your instincts can carry you." Callum raised an eyebrow. "Instincts?" "You've already demonstrated a natural aptitude for astral projection," Eldrin explained. "But skill without control is dangerous. Let's test your reflexes, your focus, and your ability to adapt under pressure." Eldrin raised his staff, and the room shifted around them. The smooth obsidian floor rippled like water, and columns of stone rose from the ground, forming a maze that stretched high into the air. "Navigate the maze," Eldrin instructed. "The exit is on the far side. Sounds simple enough, doesn't it?" "Too simple," Callum muttered, eyeing the twisting passages ahead. Eldrin's lips twitched into the faintest smile. "You'll find that nothing in the sanctum is as it seems." Callum stepped into the maze, his senses on high alert. The air felt heavier here, the faint hum of the sanctum replaced by an eerie silence. He moved quickly but cautiously, turning corners and marking his path in his head. Suddenly, the walls shifted. A passage he'd just walked through sealed behind him, and new paths opened ahead. "Great," Callum muttered, his frustration growing. He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the space around him. He reached out with his senses, trying to feel the flow of the maze. A faint tug in his chest guided him to the left, and he followed it without hesitation. The walls shifted again, but Callum didn't falter. Each time the maze tried to throw him off, he adjusted, trusting the instincts Eldrin had praised. Within minutes, he emerged on the far side, breathing hard but triumphant. Eldrin stood waiting, his expression unreadable. "Impressive," he said, his voice tinged with approval. "You're faster than I expected." "Is that it?" Callum asked, grinning. Eldrin chuckled softly. "Not quite." With a wave of his staff, the floor of the chamber dissolved beneath Callum's feet. He plummeted into darkness, the air rushing past him as he fell. Callum's heart raced, but his instincts kicked in. He focused on the sensation of flight, willing himself to stop falling. His descent slowed, and he hovered in midair, surrounded by an endless void. "Good," Eldrin's voice echoed around him. "Now, come back to me." Callum searched the void, spotting a faint light in the distance. He flew toward it, faster and steadier with each second, until the sanctum reformed around him. He landed smoothly, his breath coming in quick bursts. "You've passed every test I've thrown at you tonight," Eldrin said, his gaze filled with quiet pride. "Your instincts are remarkable, Callum. Few have ever adapted to this world as quickly as you have." Callum straightened, feeling a swell of pride. "So, what's next?" Eldrin leaned on his staff, his expression growing thoughtful. "Let me tell you about the Society's purpose. We've done great things in this world, more than most will ever know. We've stopped wars before they began, saved lives no one knew were in danger, brought peace to places the waking world has long forgotten." "That sounds incredible," Callum said. "Why not let people know? Wouldn't it be good publicity?" Eldrin shook his head. "We act as silent vigilantes, Callum, The world isn't ready to know about us. Not yet. Our strength lies in secrecy. To reveal ourselves would invite chaos. Callum nodded slowly, the weight of Eldrin's words sinking in. Before Eldrin could continue, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. Callum turned to see Vexa Druin entering the sanctum, her emerald eyes glowing softly in the torchlight. "Eldrin," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "I didn't mean to interrupt, but we need to talk." Eldrin's gaze flicked to Vexa, then back to Callum. "We'll finish this conversation another night," he said. "For now, take what you've learned and reflect on it. You've done well tonight." Callum hesitated, wanting to ask more, but the look in Vexa's eyes told him whatever she had to say was important. He nodded and stepped back, watching as Eldrin and Vexa moved to speak in hushed tones. Callum turned to leave the sanctum, his mind buzzing with everything Eldrin had said. The flickering glow of the torches cast long shadows across the chamber, and the weight of the night's lessons settled heavily on his shoulders. "Callum." The sound of his name stopped him in his tracks. He turned to see Vexa standing near one of the stone pillars, her emerald eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "You're not leaving already, are you?" she asked, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I figured Eldrin was done with me for the night," Callum replied, trying to keep his tone casual. Vexa tilted her head, the soft waves of her midnight black hair catching the light. "He might be, but I'm not." Callum blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Vexa stepped forward, crossing the room with a confident grace that made it impossible to look away. "How about we spar? A little extra training before you go." Callum hesitated, glancing around the empty chamber. "Spar? Like, fight?" She stopped a few feet away, arching an eyebrow. "We call it an astral clash, a duel between two projectors to sharpen their skills. Don't worry," she added, her smile turning playful. "It's just practice. No one's getting hurt." The phrase sent a thrill through him, as though the words themselves carried power. "An astral clash," he repeated. It had a weight to it, like something out of legend. "What do you say?" Vexa asked, tilting her head slightly. Callum felt his nerves tighten, but he nodded. "All right, let's do it." Vexa's smile widened, and she stepped back, giving him space. "Good. Let's see what you've got." She raised her hands, and the air around her shimmered faintly. The torches dimmed, and a circle of glowing light formed on the ground between them, its edges pulsing softly. "Step into the ring, Callum." Callum swallowed hard, stepping into the circle. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air inside the ring felt different, charged, alive. Vexa's playful smile turned determined. "In an astral clash, we test each other's focus, agility, and control. You'll need to think fast and move faster." She dropped into a defensive stance, her hands glowing faintly with a soft blue light. "Let's see if Eldrin's right about you." The duel began with a flash of movement. Vexa darted forward, her speed unreal. Callum barely had time to react as she aimed a strike at his side, not with fists, but with a burst of glowing energy that seemed to flow from her hand. Instinctively, Callum dodged, his movements clumsy but effective. He countered with a sweeping motion, sending a ripple of energy toward her. Vexa spun gracefully, deflecting the attack with ease. "Not bad," she said, her voice teasing, "but you'll have to do better than that." Callum grinned, his confidence building. He focused on the energy around him, feeling it flow through his body like a current. He charged forward, aiming a burst of light at Vexa's feet. The energy struck the ground, forcing her to leap back, her boots barely touching the floor before she sprang into action again. They moved like dancers, their strikes and counters weaving a pattern of light and motion. Vexa's movements were precise and controlled, her attacks elegant but relentless. Callum relied on instinct, each dodge and counter sharper than the last. At one point, Vexa feinted left and struck from the right, her glowing hand slicing through the air. Callum ducked just in time, spinning and launching a wave of energy toward her. The wave rippled through the air, forcing Vexa to backpedal, her eyes narrowing with approval. "You're a quick learner," she said, her voice steady despite the exertion. "I've had a good teacher," Callum shot back, surprising himself with the flirty edge in his tone. Vexa smirked, and for a moment, the intensity of the duel softened. But it didn't last. She surged forward again, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air that sent spiraling orbs of light toward him. Callum dodged one, deflected another, and, in a burst of inspiration, caught the third. The energy pulsed in his hand, warm and alive, before he hurled it back at Vexa. The orb shattered against her shield, and she stumbled slightly, her eyes widening. "All right," she said, her tone tinged with surprise. "Maybe you're better than I thought." Callum grinned, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "Maybe?" Vexa laughed softly but didn't respond. Instead, she moved faster than before, her attacks coming in a blur of light and motion. Callum struggled to keep up, each dodge and block pushing him closer to the edge of the ring. "Careful," Vexa said, her voice teasing. "You're running out of room." Callum tried to counter with a surge of energy, but Vexa was faster. She closed the distance between them in an instant, her hand glowing brightly as she aimed a final strike. Before Callum could react, she changed direction. Her free hand flicked upward, sending a harmless burst of light into the air. The distraction was enough. Callum hesitated for half a second, and Vexa swept his legs out from under him. He landed on his back with a soft thud, staring up at the ceiling in disbelief. Vexa stood over him, her hands on her hips and a triumphant smile on her face. "And that's how you win an astral clash." Callum groaned but couldn't help laughing. "You cheated." "Distraction isn't cheating," Vexa said, extending a hand to help him up. "It's strategy." Callum took her hand, letting her pull him to his feet. Their eyes met for a moment, and Callum felt his cheeks warm under her gaze. "You did well," Vexa said softly, her teasing tone replaced by something gentler. "Better than most on their first try." "Thanks," Callum replied, his voice quieter now. For a moment, the room felt still, the faint hum of the sanctum fading into the background. Vexa's smile softened, and Callum felt his heart skip a beat. "Well," she said, breaking the silence, "we'll have to spar again sometime, but don't think I'll go easy on you next time." "I wouldn't expect you to," Callum said, grinning. Vexa turned to leave, but Callum stayed rooted in place, watching her until she disappeared into the shadows of the sanctum. As he prepared to leave, a single thought lingered in his mind. He couldn't wait to come back. Callum lingered near the edge of the sanctum, his mind still racing from his sparring match with Vexa. The glow of the chamber seemed to pulse faintly as the rest of the space fell into a peaceful silence. He rubbed the back of his neck, the warmth of Vexa's final words still lingering in his thoughts. But just as he was about to let the pull of his alarm wake him, a sound froze him in place. Voices. He crept closer to the far edge of the chamber, where the shadows deepened into a narrow corridor. The voices were faint, muffled, but unmistakable. Callum pressed himself against a pillar, straining to hear. Can't keep following him. He's weak, refuses to see the possibilities. The voice was sharp, venomous. Callum's stomach turned. He knew that tone. It belonged to Talon. Others will join us. They see it too. Eldrin's time is over. The words weren't clear, but they were enough to send a chill through Callum. His heart pounded as he pieced together what little he could hear. A rebellion? His hands clenched into fists. The murmurs faded, and heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Callum ducked back into the sanctum, but before he could fully retreat, Talon emerged from the shadows, their eyes locked. Talon's dark gaze lingered on Callum, his expression unreadable but cold. Callum's alarm began to pull at him, the sanctum dissolving into a haze, but Talon didn't look away. His lips curled into a faint, knowing smirk. Callum jolted awake in his bed, his heart racing. The memory of Talon's voice and the weight of his gaze made his chest tighten. He reached for his phone and opened a message to Reese. He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the send button, before hitting it. The response came quickly. There was a pause. The 3 dots indicating Reese was typing appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. Callum nodded to himself, though his worry didn't ease. The day dragged on. Callum sat at his desk at work, staring at the same spreadsheet he hadn't finished the day before. His head felt heavy and his eyelids drooped. The sleepless nights were catching up to him, and even the lingering adrenaline from the sanctum couldn't keep him fully alert. Around mid-morning, his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching and picked it up. Callum blinked at the message, his exhaustion making it hard to process. He looked at the clock, 10:37 a.m., and then back at the screen. Callum frowned, glancing around the office. Carrie was busy typing away at her computer, and Mr. Stevens wasn't in sight. Taking a deep breath, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He let the weight of sleep take over, pulling him under quickly. The silvery glow of the dream world greeted him instantly, and as his projection took form, he realized he wasn't alone. Reese stood next to him, his arms crossed and his expression serious. "Took you long enough," Reese said, his voice carrying a sharp edge. "Reese?" Callum asked, his surprise evident. "What's going on?" Reese gestured for him to follow to a quieter room. Reese led him to the break room. "You were right," Reese said as they walked. "Talon's up to something. I've been hearing rumors for months now, but I didn't want to believe them." "What kind of rumors?" Callum asked, his voice tightening. "That he's been experimenting with darker aspects of astral projection," Reese said, his tone grim. "There are things we're not supposed to do, things Eldrin has forbidden. Talon doesn't care. He's been recruiting others, convincing them that Eldrin's holding us back." Callum's stomach churned. "What kind of things?" "Breaking into people's minds, manipulating dreams, possessing physical bodies for longer than the natural limit." Reese's voice darkened. "Some even say he's trying to access the void." "The void?" "It's the space beyond this world, the place between dreams and reality. It's dangerous. No one who's entered it has ever come back." Callum stopped walking, his fists clenching. "Does Eldrin know?" Reese turned to face him, his expression troubled. "Not yet. I didn't want to tell him without proof. But if Talon's really planning something, Eldrin could be in danger." "Then we need to tell him," Callum said firmly. Reese hesitated, then nodded. "Tonight, meet me at the Batman building at 9. We'll go to the sanctum together." Callum felt a spark of determination ignite in his chest. "I'll be there." Reese placed a hand on Callum's shoulder, his usual playful demeanor replaced by something far more serious. "Be careful, Callum. Talon's dangerous, and if he knows you're onto him—" "I can handle it," Callum said, though the weight of Reese's words stayed with him. As the pull of reality began to drag him back to his waking body, Callum steeled himself. Tonight, they would warn Eldrin. Whatever Talon was planning, Callum wouldn't let it go unchecked. "Callum!" The voice jolted Callum back into reality, yanking him out of the dream world with a force that left him disoriented. He blinked up at the fluorescent lights of the office and the stern, scowling face of Mr. Stevens towering over him. "Sleeping? In the middle of the workday?" Stevens snapped, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Callum sat up quickly, his heart sinking. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to— Save it! Stevens cut him off, his voice cold and final. Office. Now. The tension in the small room was suffocating as Callum sat in front of Stevens's desk. The older man leaned forward, his jaw tight, and his eyes narrowed in frustration. This is the second time in as many days that I've had to call you in here, Stevens began. Your performance has been slipping, you've been distracted, and now you're sleeping on the job. I gave you a chance to turn things around, Callum, but it's clear your head's not in the game. Callum opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. What could he say? That his mind was consumed by a secret world of astral projection and rebellion? That he was fighting battles in his dreams? Callum, Stevens said, his voice softer but still firm. I'm sorry, but this is your last day. Finish up your tasks and clear out your desk by 5. The words hit like a gut punch. Fired. It was over. Callum nodded numbly, unable to muster the energy to fight back. Understood, he said quietly. Stevens sighed and leaned back in his chair. You're a good kid, Callum. But you've got to figure out where your priorities lie. I hope you land on your feet. Callum spent the rest of the day in a haze, going through the motions of packing his things and saying awkward goodbyes to co-workers who barely knew him. By the time he got home, his thoughts were a tangled mess of emotions. He felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. Losing his job stung, but what made it worse was the uncertainty of the dream world. Talon's rebellion, Eldrin's warnings about dark powers, it all felt like it was spiraling out of control. Callum sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the clock. It was only 6:30 p.m., and the hours stretched ahead of him like an eternity. He tried watching TV, but the noise grated on his nerves. He tried eating, but his appetite was gone. By 8:30, he couldn't wait any longer. He turned off his alarm clock. There was no need for it now. At exactly 8:50, he laid back on his bed, closed his eyes, and willed himself into sleep. The Batman building loomed before him, its twin spires cutting into the night sky like jagged blades. Callum landed lightly on the rooftop, the wind tugging at his jacket as he scanned the skyline for Reese. 9 o'clock. He waited, pacing back and forth, his nerves gnawing at him with every passing second. The city below was eerily quiet, and the faint hum of the dream world did nothing to calm him. 9:10. Where are you? Callum muttered, glancing over the edge of the building. By 9:15, he couldn't wait any longer. Fear clawed at him, fear that Talon might strike before he and Reese could warn Eldrin. I'm sorry, Reese, he whispered. I have to go. With a determined breath, Callum pushed off the roof and soared into the night. The flight to the sanctum was faster this time, his urgency propelling him forward. Eldrin was standing near the center of the sanctum when Callum arrived, his long silver hair glowing faintly in the light of the orbs overhead. He looked up, his sharp blue eyes widening slightly in surprise. Callum, Eldrin said, his voice steady but curious. I wasn't expecting you tonight. I had to come, Callum replied, landing smoothly and walking toward him. It's about Talon. Eldrin's expression darkened, and he gestured for Callum to sit. Go on. Callum quickly recounted what he had overheard and how Talon's words hinted at rebellion. Eldrin listened in silence, his gaze steady but thoughtful. When Callum finished, Eldrin sighed deeply and leaned on his staff. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this. You knew? Callum asked, startled. I've known for some time, Eldrin admitted. Talon is a gifted projector, one of the most gifted I've ever seen. I met him when he was just a boy, alone and frightened, struggling to understand his abilities. I brought him here, to the sanctum, and taught him everything I could. Eldrin's gaze grew distant, his voice tinged with sorrow. But as his powers grew, so did his hunger for knowledge. He wanted to know everything our abilities could do, every secret, every possibility. But there are some things, Callum, that are better left unknown. What do you mean? Callum asked. There are aspects of astral projection, dark powers, that corrupt those who use them, Eldrin said gravely. Mind manipulation, dream possession, the void. These abilities serve no good purpose, only destruction. I've never taught them to the society, and for good reason. The world already has enough darkness. We don't need more. Callum felt a chill run down his spine. And Talon, he's accessed these powers? Eldrin nodded slowly. I believe he has, and I fear he intends to use them to overthrow me and take control of the society. The weight of Eldrin's words settled heavily on Callum's shoulders. What do we do? Callum asked, his voice low but steady. Eldrin opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the air in the sanctum shifted. A deep, resonating rumble shook the chamber, the stone floor trembling beneath their feet. The glowing orbs dimmed, flickering as if caught in a sudden gust of wind. Callum's head snapped toward the entrance just as the heavy doors creaked open, the shadows beyond deepening into impenetrable darkness. A figure emerged, cloaked in black, his presence commanding and menacing. It was Talon. He stepped into the sanctum with deliberate slowness, the faint glow of the orbs catching on his dark, gleaming armor. The plates were sleek and angular, designed to intimidate, with sharp edges that reflected the light like shards of obsidian. A long, tattered black cloak billowed behind him, and a mask obscured his face, its surface smooth and expressionless, except for 2 slashes of glowing red where his eyes should have been. Eldrin straightened, gripping his staff tightly as Talon came to a stop at the center of the chamber. Talon, Eldrin said, his voice calm but firm. What is the meaning of this? Talon tilted his head slightly, his voice cold and mocking as he spoke. Oh, Eldrin, still clinging to your precious rules, even when the walls of your little world are crumbling around you. You don't have to do this, Eldrin said, stepping forward. His tone carried the weight of years of wisdom, an unshakable steadiness. Whatever darkness you've allowed into your heart, it's not too late to turn back. Talon laughed, the sound sharp and hollow as it echoed through the chamber. Turn back? You still don't get it, do you? You've spent decades hoarding the secrets of our abilities, doling out scraps while pretending to be a benevolent leader. But I see the truth. You're afraid of what we're capable of. Afraid of me. You're wrong, Eldrin said, his voice unwavering. The knowledge I withhold is not out of fear, but out of necessity. There are paths that lead only to destruction, Talon. You've stepped onto one of them. Talon took another step forward, his glowing eyes narrowing. Destruction? No, Eldrin. Rebirth. The society is stagnant, weighed down by your cowardice. But under my leadership, we'll unlock the full potential of astral projection. No limits, no restrictions. True power. Callum felt a chill run down his spine as Talon's words sank in. Eldrin, Talon continued, his voice growing darker, your time is over. He gestured toward the shadows, and figures began to emerge. One by one, the other members of the society stepped into the sanctum. Freya, Orin, Darius, Zana, Lucan, Mira, Holt, and Quinn, all of them stood behind Talon, their faces cold and resolute. Callum's breath caught. No, he whispered. They're all with him? Talon turned toward Callum briefly, his voice dripping with mockery. They've seen the truth, Callum. They understand that Eldrin's rule has held us back. But don't worry, you are welcome to join us, if you survive tonight. Talon, Eldrin said, his voice sharp now. Stop this madness before it's too late. "It's already too late," Talon replied, raising his hand. "The reign of the society ends tonight." The first strike came fast. Talon conjured a massive ball of fire, its edges writhing with dark energy, and hurled it toward Eldrin with a roar. Eldrin moved with practiced precision, raising his staff. A translucent barrier appeared in front of him, absorbing the fireball in an explosion of light and heat. The flames dissipated, but Talon was relentless. He conjured jagged shards of ice, launching them in rapid succession. Eldrin twirled his staff, the air around him shimmering as the ice shattered harmlessly against a protective dome. "You can't win this way, Talon," Eldrin said, his voice calm even as the attacks continued. Talon smirked behind his mask. "Who said anything about playing fair?" The shadows around him shifted, forming into clawed tendrils that lashed out toward Eldrin. Eldrin stepped back, his movements smooth and deliberate. He struck the floor with his staff, and vines of glowing energy erupted upward, wrapping around the shadowy tendrils and pulling them to the ground. The clash intensified, each move more spectacular than the last. Talon conjured a storm of jagged black spears, each one dripping with dark energy. Eldrin countered with walls of shimmering light that deflected the spears with ease. Talon shifted tactics, summoning a swarm of fiery projectiles that spiraled toward Eldrin in chaotic patterns. Eldrin raised his hand, and the projectiles froze in midair before dissolving into harmless sparks. "You've grown strong, Talon," he said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "But strength without wisdom is a dangerous thing." "Spare me the lectures," Talon snarled, summoning a massive two-handed sword made of swirling black fire. He charged forward, slashing at Eldrin with ferocious speed. Eldrin blocked the attack with his staff, the impact sending shockwaves through the chamber. The two clashed in a flurry of strikes, each movement precise and calculated. Eldrin's staff glowed with radiant energy, deflecting Talon's attacks with a grace that seemed almost effortless. But Talon's anger fueled him, his strikes growing more powerful with each passing second. He unleashed a barrage of dark energy, forcing Eldrin to retreat. "You can't stop me," Talon growled. "You've already lost." Eldrin struck the floor again, and beams of light shot upward, creating a barrier between them. "It's not too late, Talon. End this now." Talon's response was a roar of fury. He shattered the barrier with a massive surge of energy and unleashed a devastating combo of attacks, fire, shadow, and raw force, each strike faster and more relentless than the last. Eldrin blocked and deflected as best he could, but the sheer ferocity of Talon's assault began to wear him down. A blast of dark energy struck Eldrin's side, sending him staggering backward. "Talon, stop!" Callum shouted, stepping forward. But Talon didn't stop. He struck again and again, each attack finding its mark. Eldrin's defenses crumbled, and with one final devastating blow, Talon sent him crashing to the floor. The sanctum fell silent. Callum stared in horror as Eldrin's lifeless body lay motionless on the obsidian floor, his staff rolling from his hand. Talon stood over him, his glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness. "The age of Eldrin is over," he said, his voice cold and final. "And the era of true power begins." The air in the sanctum was heavy, the silence suffocating. The flickering orbs overhead dimmed, their glow fading as though the life had been drained from the room itself. Callum couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on Eldrin's lifeless body sprawled across the cold obsidian floor. The man who had been a pillar of wisdom and strength, who had shown Callum a glimpse of his potential and given him a sense of belonging, now lay motionless, his silver hair fanned out like a halo. The staff that Eldrin had wielded with such grace rolled a few feet away, its glow extinguished. It looked broken, like its master. Callum's chest tightened, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. "No." The word escaped his lips as a whisper, barely audible. He took a hesitant step forward, his legs trembling beneath him. The enormity of what had just happened was too much to process. Eldrin, the leader of the society, the man who had seen something special in Callum, was gone. Callum knelt beside Eldrin, his hands hovering uselessly over the older man's still form. He wanted to shake him, to will him back to life, but he couldn't bring himself to touch him. The finality of it was too much to bear. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. The question wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but it hung in the air like a lead weight. Callum's vision blurred with tears, and he swiped at his face, trying to hold himself together. Eldrin had been more than just a teacher. In the brief time Callum had known him, he had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that Callum's abilities were more than just strange dreams or random gifts. Eldrin had made him believe that he could be part of something greater, that he could make a difference in the world. And now he was gone. Callum's shoulders shook as a sob escaped him. He didn't care who saw. The grief was too raw, too overwhelming to hide. The silence was broken by the sound of Talon's voice, cold and unfeeling. "Pathetic," he said, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "You mourn a man who kept you chained, who denied you the truth of what you're capable of." Callum didn't look up. He couldn't. "He was weak," Talon continued, his tone growing sharper. "He chose ignorance over power. He kept you all in the dark because he was afraid of what you might become." Callum clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. The words stung, but his grief outweighed his anger. "He gave me purpose," Callum said quietly, his voice trembling. "He believed in me when no one else did." Talon scoffed. "He used you, just like he used all of us, but no more." Callum finally looked up, his tear-streaked face meeting the glowing red slashes of Talon's mask. There was no hatred in his eyes, only a profound sadness that seemed to pierce through Talon's bravado. "You'll never understand what he stood for," Callum said, his voice steadier now. "And that's why you'll never be what he was." For a moment, Talon said nothing. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, but Callum didn't flinch. Then, without warning, Talon stepped closer, his presence looming over Callum like a shadow. His glowing red eyes bore down on him through the mask, and before Callum could react, Talon grabbed him by the arm and yanked him to his feet. "Enough," Talon said, his voice low and sharp. "You've had your moment. Now we leave." Callum tried to pull away, his voice trembling with anger and grief. "I'm not going anywhere. Eldrin deserves more than this. Talon's grip tightened, cutting him off. "Eldrin is dead," he said coldly. "This place, his legacy, is dead. Clinging to it won't change that." Callum's chest heaved with emotion, but Talon didn't relent. He gestured sharply toward the others, who began moving toward the exit with eerie precision. "We're done here," Talon said, his tone final. "Move." Callum dug his heels in, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm not leaving him." "You don't have a choice," Talon snapped. In one swift motion, he pulled Callum toward him and propelled them both into the air. The flight was disorienting, the wind whipping past Callum's face as Talon carried him out of the sanctum. Callum's heart pounded, his mind racing with the events of the night. Eldrin's lifeless body, the devastation in the chamber, and now this, being dragged away against his will. Talon's grip was unyielding, his dark cloak billowing behind him as they soared through the night. The other members followed in formation, their movements swift and synchronized like shadows gliding through the sky. They landed on the roof of a nearby building, its flat surface bathed in faint moonlight. Callum stumbled as his feet hit the ground, his knees threatening to give out beneath him. "What are you doing?" Callum demanded, his voice raw with emotion. Talon ignored him, his focus on the sanctum in the distance. The ancient structure stood silently against the night sky, its glowing orbs barely visible from where they stood. Talon raised his hand, his voice carrying an edge of cruel satisfaction. "Light it up." The command hung in the air for a heartbeat before the other members responded. Together, they raised their hands, their combined energy creating a pulsating sphere of dark light. The energy crackled, radiating with raw power, and then, in unison, they hurled it toward the sanctum. Callum's eyes widened in horror. "No! Stop!" The sphere struck the sanctum, and for a moment everything was still. Then, with a deafening roar, the ancient structure exploded. The ground beneath them trembled as a shockwave rippled outward, shaking the nearby buildings. Flames erupted from the ruins, consuming what little remained of the sanctum. The glowing orbs that had once illuminated the chamber winked out one by one, their light extinguished forever. Callum staggered backward, his breath caught in his throat as he watched the destruction unfold. Talon stood at the edge of the rooftop, his mask gleaming in the firelight. "The sanctum was a relic of the past," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "a symbol of Eldrin's failure. It's time for a new beginning." Callum's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. His grief burned into anger, but he held his tongue, knowing that now wasn't the time to act. He turned his gaze back to the flames, the loss of Eldrin and the sanctum settling heavily on his chest. The sanctum was gone, and with it, the only place Callum had begun to feel at home. Callum's heart was pounding as he stared at the blazing remains of the sanctum. The flames reflected in his eyes, their flickering light contrasting sharply with the oppressive darkness of the night. His fists remained clenched, his mind a whirlwind of emotions, grief, anger, confusion. Behind him, Talon turned, his cloak sweeping across the rooftop as he faced Callum. The glowing red eyes of his mask bore into Callum with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "You've seen what I'm capable of," Talon said, his voice smooth and calculated. "What we're capable of. That's only the beginning, Callum." Callum didn't respond. His jaw tightened, and he forced himself to meet Talon's gaze despite the unease crawling up his spine. Talon stepped closer, his tone softening, almost coaxing. "You don't have to fight this, Callum. You're different. You have power, potential, more than Eldrin ever understood. You felt it, didn't you? The shackles he kept on us, the limits he imposed out of his own fear." Callum shook his head, his voice low but firm. "Eldrin didn't hold us back. He protected us." "Protected you from what?" Talon countered sharply. "From the truth? From what you're meant to be?" "Eldrin was a coward, Callum. He was afraid of what we could accomplish, what you could accomplish. He saw your potential, but he would have kept you in chains, just like the rest of us." Callum's chest tightened as Talon's words sank in. There was something undeniably persuasive about them, an allure that tugged at the edges of his doubt. "You think I didn't feel what you felt?" Talon continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That burning need to understand, to push further, to see what lies beyond the surface? That's what drove me, and now I can offer you the same freedom." Talon extended a gloved hand toward Callum. "Join me. Join the Abyssal Dominion. Together we'll uncover the true power of astral projection. No limits, no restrictions, only possibility. With your gifts and my vision, we could reshape the world." Callum took a step back, his throat dry. He could feel the weight of the other members' eyes on him, their silent presence a reminder of how far Talon's influence had already spread. "What you're doing isn't freedom," Callum said, his voice trembling but steady. "It's destruction. You've turned your back on everything the society stood for. The society is dead, Talon snapped, his calm demeanor slipping. You saw it fall tonight. What I'm offering is something greater, something real. Don't waste this opportunity, Callum. You've already proven you're not like the others. Callum straightened, forcing himself to hold Talon's gaze. You're right. I'm not like the others. His voice grew stronger. I'm not like you. A flicker of frustration crossed Talon's masked face. Don't be a fool, he said coldly. This world will change with or without you. Choose wisely, Callum. The Abyssal Dominion has no room for weakness. Callum's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. I'm not joining you. Before Talon could respond, a rush of wind swept across the rooftop. Callum turned, his breath catching in his throat as a familiar figure descended gracefully from the night sky. Vexa. Her midnight black hair flowed behind her like a veil, and her emerald eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. She landed lightly on the rooftop, her boots clicking softly against the concrete as she straightened. What's going on? She asked, her voice carrying a mix of concern and confusion. Her gaze flicked from Talon to Callum and then to the burning remnants of the sanctum in the distance. I felt the shockwave. What happened? Callum opened his mouth to answer, but Talon spoke first, his voice calm and deliberate. Eldrin is dead, he said simply. The sanctum is gone. The society is no more. Vexa's emerald eyes widened, her lips parting in a sharp intake of breath. For a moment, she looked genuinely frightened, her gaze darting to Callum as though searching for confirmation. Dead? She whispered. You killed him? Talon nodded slowly, his red eyes gleaming through the mask. It was necessary. He clung to the past, to weakness. It was time to move forward. Vexa hesitated, her expression shifting as though she were struggling to process the gravity of the moment. Then, slowly, she took a step closer to Talon. So, she said softly, her voice steadying, we're actually going through with this. Callum froze, the words hitting him like a blow to the chest. What? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Vexa turned to him, her expression unreadable. For a moment there was silence, the crackle of distant flames the only sound. You knew, Callum said, his voice trembling. You knew this was going to happen. Vexa's lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't know it would be tonight, she said, stepping closer to Callum. But yes, I knew. Talon and we've been planning this for a long time. Callum stumbled back, shaking his head in disbelief. You were with him? You betrayed Eldrin? Betrayed? Vexa repeated, tilting her head. No, Callum, I chose the future. Her voice softened, and she took another step toward him, her emerald eyes locking onto his. Eldrin was a good man, but he was blind. He kept us shackled, afraid of what we could become. Talon sees the truth. He sees what's possible if we embrace our full potential. Callum's heart pounded as he tried to process her words. Eldrin gave you everything, he said, his voice rising. He trusted you. Vexa's expression shifted, a flicker of something unspoken crossing her face before she forced a smile. He gave me a cage, Callum. Talon is offering me wings. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. And he's offering them to you too. Callum flinched at her touch, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. You're trying to manipulate me, he said, his voice unsteady. Why? Vexa's lips curled into a sly smile. Because I see something in you, Callum. Something none of the others have. You're different. Special. Eldrin saw it too, didn't he? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. But he would have kept you in his shadow, just like he did with the rest of us. With Talon, you'd be free. You could be great. Callum's breath caught as her emerald eyes bore into his. Her presence was magnetic, her words laced with a dangerous allure. I don't want greatness, he said, his voice shaking. I want to do what's right. Vexa sighed, her hand trailing down his arm as she stepped back. Right, she repeated, her tone almost mocking. Right by whose standards, Callum? Eldrin's? The man who kept you in the dark about the truth of our abilities? Callum's fists clenched. Eldrin didn't want power for himself. He wanted to protect us. Protect you. Vexa's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. Protect us from what? Ourselves? That's not protection, it's control. Eldrin feared what we could become, but I don't. I see the potential in all of us, Callum, and I see it in you. Her voice softened again, and she leaned in, her gaze searching his. Come with us. You don't belong in the shadows. You belong with me. Callum's chest tightened, the conflict raging within him. For a moment, he was speechless, caught between the gravity of her words and the pain of her betrayal. I can't, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Vexa's smile faltered, but only for a second. She straightened, her emerald eyes glinting with something unreadable. You will, she said, her tone cool but certain. You just don't realize it yet. Callum shook his head, his voice firm despite the fear tightening his chest. I'll never join you. Talon's posture stiffened, the faint air of amusement around him vanishing in an instant. Never is a dangerous word, Callum, he said, his voice cold and sharp. Eldrin said never, and look where he is now. Callum swallowed hard, but he didn't back down. You can threaten me all you want, but I'll never stand with you. Talon's glowing red eyes narrowed, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Then, you've made your choice. With a flick of his hand, Talon conjured shimmering black ropes that shot toward Callum like vipers. They coiled around his arms and legs, binding him in place. The ropes pulsed with dark energy, their grip unyielding as Callum struggled against them. Talon, stop this! Callum shouted, his voice strained as he fought against the bonds. But Talon didn't listen. He raised one hand, and a ball of fire began to form above his palm, its core burning a deep crimson. The flames crackled ominously, casting flickering shadows across Talon's dark armor. Join us, Talon said, his voice low and deadly. Or meet the same end as your beloved Eldrin. Callum's heart raced, his mind screaming for a way out. But no matter how hard he struggled, the ropes held firm. The fireball grew larger, its heat searing against his skin even from a distance. I won't do it, Callum said, his voice trembling but resolute. I'll never join you. Talon's mask tilted slightly, as if he were studying Callum's resolve. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he raised the fireball higher, its flames roaring to life. Callum clenched his fists, his breathing shallow as the heat of the fireball pressed closer. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the inevitable. This is it, he thought. But instead of pain, there was silence. Callum's eyes fluttered open, and he blinked in confusion. The ropes, the fire, the rooftop, they were gone. He was lying in his bed, the faint morning light streaming through his window. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at the ceiling, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, he couldn't move, the memories of the confrontation with Talon still fresh in his mind. He was alive. Callum stirred, his body tense as the vivid memory of flames and chains lingered in his mind. The faint morning light filtered through his curtains, but another presence jolted him fully awake. Callum! Callum! Wake up! Reese's voice was frantic, and Callum felt hands shaking him urgently. His eyes snapped open, meeting Reese's pale, worried face hovering over him. "Reese?" Callum croaked, his voice raw from the strain of the night's events. "Oh, thank God," Reese said, his shoulders sagging with relief. I couldn't wake you up. You weren't moving, and I thought—" He broke off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Callum pushed himself upright, his body trembling. "Reese, what are you doing here?" "I couldn't sleep," Reese said quickly, his words tumbling out in a rush. "After what we talked about yesterday, I tried, but every time I closed my eyes, I couldn't. I was too scared of what might happen. And then, when I finally fell asleep, I couldn't find you." He swallowed hard, his face pale. "I freaked out, okay? I thought something had happened, so I came here to check on you." Callum stared at him, still trying to process everything. "You couldn't sleep?" Reese nodded, a bitter laugh escaping him. "Yeah. Big surprise, right? I'm not exactly the poster boy for bravery." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding Callum's gaze. "I'm more brains than ability, and even then my abilities are— Let's just say I'm no Talon. If it ever came down to a fight, I wouldn't stand a chance. Anxiety's kinda my thing, you know?" Callum's heart ached at the sight of his friend's vulnerability, but a realization struck him. "You couldn't find me?" Reese shook his head. It was like you weren't there. "What happened?" Callum's throat tightened, and he took a deep breath. "Reese, Eldrin's dead." The color drained from Reese's face. "What?" "Talon killed him," Callum said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The sanctum is gone. He destroyed it. The society. It's over." Reese staggered back, his hands gripping the edge of Callum's bed for support. "Eldrin was— He was everything," Callum said, his chest tightening with grief. "And now he's gone." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the loss pressing down on them like a physical force. "But that's not all," Callum continued, his voice trembling. "Talon's formed a group, the Abyssal Dominion. He's recruited everyone else. It's just us now." Reese's hands tightened into fists, his knuckles white. "What do we do?" Callum hesitated, his mind racing with possibilities. "We need to meet, talk this through, and figure out our next move." Reese nodded, though his face was still pale. "Where?" "The Copper Hearth Bistro," Callum said. "Noon." "Okay," Reese said, his voice unsteady. He glanced toward the window, the faint light of dawn beginning to creep into the room. "We'll figure this out, Callum. We have to." Callum nodded, though his chest felt hollow. "Yeah, we will." As Reese left, Callum lay back down, staring at the ceiling. The events of the night replayed in his mind, vivid and relentless. Eldrin was gone. The sanctum was gone. And the shadow of Talon's dominion loomed larger than ever. But for now, he had to focus on tomorrow. Callum lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear, grief, and uncertainty. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flames consuming the sanctum, Eldrin's lifeless body sprawled on the floor, and Talon's piercing red eyes behind that mask. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke through his window, Callum hadn't slept a second. He rose with a heavy heart, moving through his morning routine on autopilot. His mind kept circling back to the same questions. What do I do now? How do I stop Talon? Can I even stop him? No answers came. He hoped Reese would have some idea of what to do. Callum wasn't a strategist, wasn't someone who could see the bigger picture. But Reese, despite his anxiety, was smart. He'd always been more about the brain than the brawn. Yet, no matter how much he tried to focus on their next move, something else kept gnawing at him, a faint unease he couldn't shake. When noon finally came, Callum made his way to Copper Hearth Bistro. The restaurant was modest but cozy, with warm wooden accents and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. As soon as he stepped inside, his eyes landed on Reese, who was sitting in a corner booth near the back. Callum almost laughed out loud. Reese was wearing sunglasses, a baseball cap pulled low over his face, and a jacket with the hood up. He looked like someone trying and failing to be inconspicuous. Callum slid into the booth across from him, raising an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" Reese lowered the sunglasses slightly, his anxious eyes darting around the room. "Staying off the radar," he whispered. "You know, in case Talon sent someone after us." Callum sighed, resting his elbows on the table. "You look ridiculous." "Yeah, well," Reese said, leaning forward. "Better ridiculous than dead." Callum let out a short laugh despite himself, but his expression quickly turned serious. "By the way, how did you even get into my apartment last night?" Reese froze, the tips of his ears turning red. Yeah, about that." "Reese," Callum said, narrowing his eyes. "How?" Reese scratched the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "I told you I'm more of a brainiac than a projector, right?" "Yeah?" "Well," Reese said, sitting up straighter and lowering his voice. I tracked your location, using your phone." Callum blinked. "You what?" Reese held up his hands defensively. Okay, don't freak out. It's not that creepy. I just, used a signal triangulation method I developed for fun a couple of years ago. You know, for emergencies. I figured it'd be useful if I ever lost my phone or needed to find someone." Callum stared at him, half impressed and half concerned. "That's not normal," Reese shrugged. "What can I say? I tinker. It's not like I stalk people or anything. Just, you seemed like you might be in trouble, and I panicked." "And the door?" Callum asked, crossing his arms. "How'd you open it?" "Oh, that?" Reese said, a small grin forming on his face. "I used this prototype device I made. It's kind of like a universal key for non-electronic locks. Took me months to get it right, but..." Callum's eyes widened. "You made a device that opens any door?" Reese held up a hand, his grin turning sheepish. "I'm kidding. You left your door unlocked. But the tracking thing? That part's true." Callum groaned, covering his face with his hands. Unbelievable. The laughter between them faded as Callum's thoughts shifted back to the weight of the situation. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table, and lowered his voice. "Reese," he began, his tone serious. "There's something you need to know. Talon and the Abyssal Dominion, they're not going to just sit back and let us live our lives. They're coming for us, and it's only a matter of time." Reese froze, his already pale complexion growing even paler. His hands gripped the edge of the table, and his breathing quickened. "Coming for us? What do you mean? Why? We didn't even do anything." Callum shook his head. "It doesn't matter. We're not with them, and that makes us a threat, especially after last night." Reese's chest rose and fell rapidly, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected Talon to walk through the door at any moment. I can't handle this. I'm not built for this, Callum. I'm not you." "Reese," Callum said firmly, reaching across the table to grab his friend's arm. "Look at me." Reese's frantic gaze met his, tears welling up in his eyes. "Breathe," Callum said, his voice steady. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. Come on." Reese hesitated, but followed Callum's lead, his breath slowing as he focused on the rhythm. "That's it," Callum said, giving him an encouraging nod. "I know this is a lot, but I need you to stay with me. You're smart, Reese. You've got a brain that could put half of the society to shame. I can't do this without you." Reese swallowed hard, his breathing evening out. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this, Callum, but I'll try." "That's all I need," Callum said with a small smile. Reese nodded, wiping at his eyes. "Okay, so I did some research this morning. I think I found a place we can go." Somewhere safe. Callum tilted his head. Where? Mount Shasta, Reese said, his voice steadying as he spoke. It's in California. It's not just some random mountain, it's a hotspot for spiritual energy, a convergence point for, well, call it whatever you want. Ley lines, natural energy, even ancient astral forces. It's been talked about for centuries as a place of power. Callum leaned in, intrigued. Go on. It's not just the energy, Reese continued. The way it's positioned, the electromagnetic field surrounding the area, it makes it nearly impossible to track anyone who's projecting or using abilities tied to astral energy. Think of it like a natural cloaking device. The Abyssal Dominion wouldn't be able to find us there. And you're sure about this? Callum asked. Reese nodded. I double-checked everything I could find. It's not just a safe haven. It's a place where we could grow stronger, hone our abilities. The energy there could amplify what we're capable of. Callum sat back, processing the information. It was a long shot, but it was the best lead they had. Then we go. Reese blinked. What? Just like that? Callum nodded. We leave Nashville tomorrow morning. There's nothing left for us here, and we can't wait around for Talon to come after us. Mount Shasta is our best chance. Reese hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, how are we getting there? We'll take a bus, Callum said. It's the least conspicuous way to travel. No one's going to be looking for two guys taking a Greyhound. Fair enough, Reese said with a nervous laugh. Callum stood, throwing some cash onto the table for their meal. Go home and pack. Bring everything you can't live without. Reese followed suit, fidgeting with the strap of his bag. What do I pack? Callum met his gaze, his expression grim. Pack like you're leaving for good. The weight of the words settled between them, and Reese nodded silently. They stepped out of the restaurant into the bustling streets of Nashville, the sunlight almost too bright against the heaviness of the moment. Tomorrow, their journey would begin. Callum wandered the streets of Nashville, his heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. He passed familiar landmarks, the bustling bars of Broadway, the neon lights of honky-tonks, and the steady hum of voices that filled the air. The city had always been his home, a place where he had built a life, however unremarkable it might have seemed. But now, it felt like a distant memory, a world he could no longer be part of. He paused by the Cumberland River, leaning on the railing as he watched the water flow beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. The sound of the river was soothing, a constant in a life that was suddenly anything but. This could be the last time I see this, Callum murmured to himself. The thought hit him harder than he expected. He took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill his lungs, and forced himself to keep walking. The city was alive, vibrant as ever, but Callum felt like a ghost, slipping through the crowd unnoticed. He wanted to hold on to these moments, to savor every sight and sound of a place he might never return to. When nightfall came, Callum made his way back to his apartment. The quiet of his space felt heavier than usual, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the floorboards amplifying the stillness. He filled a glass of water from the sink, taking a long sip as he surveyed his belongings. There wasn't much to pack, just the essentials. A backpack sat open on his bed, half filled with clothes, a few books, and other necessities. Callum moved methodically, folding shirts and rolling up pairs of jeans, all while his mind raced. This is it. No turning back. He reached for his glass of water again, taking another sip as he placed his phone charger and a notebook into the bag. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though he were trying to stretch out the time he had left in this life. By the time the backpack was nearly full, Callum felt a strange heaviness creeping over him. His eyelids drooped, and a wave of exhaustion washed over him so suddenly that he had to steady himself against the bedpost. "What the?" he muttered. shaking his head in an attempt to clear it. His eyes flicked to the nightstand, where a small, empty bottle sat next to his glass of water. The label on the bottle read, melatonin. Callum's heart sank. He hadn't taken the pills, he'd been too focused on packing to even think about it. Yet the bottle was empty. His gaze snapped to the glass in his hand, realization dawning on him too late. Someone had drugged him. The room spun, his legs giving out beneath him as he stumbled forward. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor, but the sound barely registered in his foggy mind. Callum's body hit the floor with a dull thud, and the last thing he saw before everything went dark was the faint shimmer of moonlight spilling through the window. Callum's projection manifested in the familiar wooden chair, the room around him bathed in its usual silvery glow. For a moment, he sat there in confusion, his mind still clouded from the sudden exhaustion that had overtaken him. Looking down, he saw his physical body sprawled on the floor of his apartment. His heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The water, the melatonin. Someone drugged me. He stood, the chair creaking slightly behind him, and took a hesitant step forward. The sight of his unconscious form sent a chill down his spine. "What is going on?" he murmured. Before he could process it further, a rush of movement filled the room. Shadows converged from all sides, and in an instant, the Abyssal Dominion surrounded him. The familiar faces of the former society members stared back at him, their expressions cold and unyielding. Callum's fists clenched, his mind racing for a way out. But before he could act, Talon and Vexa entered. Talon's presence was suffocating, his dark mask gleaming faintly in the ethereal light. His red eyes glowed like embers, and his long black cloak swept behind him as he strode into the room with Vexa by his side. Vexa's emerald eyes locked onto Callum, her expression unreadable, but her steps purposeful. She moved with a grace that made her seem untouchable, her confidence only adding to the tension in the room. "Well, well," Talon said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look who's all alone." Callum's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stand his ground. "What do you want now, Talon?" Talon tilted his head slightly, his red eyes narrowing. "What do I want? I want you to see reason, Callum. You've been stubborn, but I'll give you one last chance to join us." "I already told you," Callum said firmly. "I'm not joining you." Talon stepped closer, his tone hardening. "Do you think this is a game? That you can just keep refusing me? There's no one here to wake you now. No Reese, no one to save you. If you don't join us, I'll end this right here, right now." Callum swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he didn't back down. "If you're going to kill me, just do it. I'm not going to be part of your destruction." Talon's hands curled into fists, the air around him shimmering with dark energy. "Do you think you're some kind of hero? Eldrin's dead. The society is gone. You're a speck of dust in a storm you can't control. If you don't join us, you'll be nothing but a memory." Callum's chest tightened, but he held Talon's gaze. "If it means standing against you, I'll take that chance." Talon's mask tilted slightly, his frustration evident. "You're a fool," he said coldly. "Enough," Vexa said, stepping forward and placing a hand on Talon's arm. Her touch seemed to calm him, though the glow of his eyes still burned fiercely. "Let me handle this," she said softly, her voice carrying an edge of confidence. Talon hesitated, then stepped back, crossing his arms as Vexa turned her attention fully to Callum. "Callum," she began, her voice soft and alluring. "You're being so stubborn. I don't understand why." Callum's brow furrowed as Vexa closed the distance between them, her emerald eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Think about what Talon is offering," she continued, her tone dripping with honey. "Power, freedom, a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. Don't you see the potential in that? I see destruction, Callum said, his voice steady despite the heat rising in his chest. Vexa's lips curved into a playful smile as she reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his arm. Destruction? No, Callum. Creation. We're building a new world, one where people like us can thrive. You could be at the center of it all, with me. Callum froze as her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. There was something magnetic about her presence, a pull that made it hard to look away. You don't have to do this alone, Vexa said, stepping closer. Her voice was barely above a whisper now, her breath warm against his ear. You could have me by your side, always. Callum's throat tightened, his thoughts a jumble of emotions. He wanted to believe in her, to trust the connection he had felt before her betrayal, but he couldn't ignore the truth. You're trying to manipulate me, he said, his voice trembling but resolute. Vexa's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew softer, almost tender. I'm trying to help you, Callum. I see so much potential in you, so much strength. You could be unstoppable. We could be unstoppable. Her hand lingered on his arm, her touch sending an electric shiver through him. Join us, she murmured, her voice like a siren song. Callum swallowed hard, his resolve wavering for a fraction of a second before he found his footing again. No, he said firmly. I won't do it. Vexa's smile faltered, but only slightly. She stepped back, her gaze flicking to Talon. Well, she said, her tone cooling. It seems our Callum still needs convincing. Talon stepped forward, his red eyes blazing. Then we'll convince him. Talon's gaze burned into Callum's projection as he tilted his head slightly, considering his next move. Slowly he turned and walked toward the kitchen, his boots echoing ominously on the floor. Callum's eyes followed him warily. Talon opened a drawer and pulled out a long, gleaming kitchen knife. He turned it over in his hands, the blade catching the silvery glow of the astral plane. What are you doing? Callum asked, his voice tight. Talon didn't answer immediately. He ran his gloved fingers along the blade before turning back toward Callum, his steps deliberate and menacing. You don't seem to understand the gravity of your situation, Talon said calmly, holding the knife up. The faint shimmer of the blade sent a chill down Callum's spine. Talon stepped closer until the knife's edge was pressed against Callum's neck. Let me make this simple. You join the Abyssal Dominion, or I end you right here, right now. Callum's breath caught as the cold blade pressed against his skin. His heart raced, and his mind screamed for a way out. Do you really think threats will change my mind? Callum asked, his voice trembling but resolute. Talon's eyes narrowed, and he applied the slightest bit of pressure with the blade. I don't need to change your mind. I just need you to realize that this is your last chance. Callum swallowed hard, his throat brushing against the blade. He closed his eyes, his mind flashing with images of Eldrin, the Sanctum, and everything he had fought for. No, he said softly. I won't do it. There was silence for a moment. Then, with a sharp motion, Talon pulled the knife. Callum braced himself, his eyes still shut, expecting the pain, the end. But nothing happened. He opened his eyes slowly, his breath hitching as he saw Talon standing in the kitchen. In his hands, he held Callum's unconscious, real-world body. The knife was pressed against his throat, the blade gleaming menacingly. The sight sent a jolt of terror through Callum. His projection trembled as he realized how dire the situation had become. No one's here to save you now, Talon said, his voice low and dangerous. This is your final chance, Callum. Join us. Callum's chest tightened as he met Talon's glowing red eyes. Talon, Vexa said softly, stepping forward. Her voice was smoother now, her movements slower, deliberate. "Let me talk to him." Talon's grip on the knife didn't loosen, but he stepped back slightly, allowing Vexa to approach Callum's projection. Vexa leaned in close, her emerald eyes shimmering with an unsettling mix of charm and desperation. "Callum?" she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this to yourself? Why fight when you can be part of something greater?" Callum shook his head, his voice cracking. "Because it's wrong." Vexa placed her hand gently on his arm, her touch sending a shiver through him. "It doesn't have to be wrong. It can be us." Her voice was honeyed, her gaze piercing. "We could do so much together. Be so much together." "Vexa, stop," Callum said, his voice shaking with frustration and sadness. "Why?" she asked, stepping closer. Her lips curled into a soft smile, and for a moment, Callum felt the same magnetic pull he had always felt around her. "You felt it, didn't you? That connection between us? It's real, Callum. It could be everything." Callum clenched his fists, fighting the wave of emotion threatening to drown him. "It's not real, Vexa. Not anymore. You made your choice." Vexa's smile faltered, but she quickly masked it, stepping back as Talon moved forward again. "Well," Talon said, his voice colder than ever, "I suppose that's your answer." Callum met Talon's gaze, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I'll never join you." Talon stared at him for a long moment, his grip tightening on the knife. "So be it." With a swift motion, Talon ran the blade across the neck of Callum's real-world body. Callum's projection gasped, his form flickering violently as pain and darkness consumed him. His last vision was of Vexa's face, her expression unreadable, as everything faded to black. Callum's projection flickered violently as the final moments of his life unraveled. His form shimmered, the silver glow dimming until it vanished completely, dissolving into the void like a faint wisp of smoke. The Abyssal Dominion stood in eerie silence for a moment, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and cold indifference. Talon turned the knife in his hand, its edge still gleaming as he surveyed the room. "It's done," Talon said, his voice calm and final. "The last remaining link to Eldrin and his outdated ideals is gone." The former society members exchanged glances, their faces betraying a mix of emotions, some resolute, others uncertain. "What about Reese?" Freya asked, breaking the silence. Her tone was sharp, tinged with worry. "He's still out there." Talon let out a low chuckle, his glowing red eyes narrowing behind the mask. "Reese." He turned slightly, addressing the group with a dismissive wave. "Reese is no threat. He's weak, a coward. His projection skills are laughable at best, and his anxiety will destroy him long before we need to lift a finger." "But he's resourceful," Xana chimed in, her brow furrowing. "If he—" Talon cut her off with a sharp look. "If Reese tries anything, he'll fail. We have nothing to fear from him. He's already lost." The room fell silent again, the members of the Dominion nodding in reluctant agreement. "Let's go," Talon said, gesturing toward the door. "We have work to do. Humanity won't bow to us overnight." The Abyssal Dominion filed out of the apartment, their movements precise and disciplined. Talon lingered for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the space one last time before stepping into the hallway. The sound of their footsteps faded, leaving the apartment eerily quiet. Callum's lifeless body lay crumpled on the floor, the faint moonlight casting long shadows across the room. The stillness was absolute, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then, without warning, Callum's body began to shimmer faintly. The edges of his form flickered, dissolving slowly, like ash carried away on a breeze. Piece by piece, his body dissipated into nothingness, vanishing as completely as his projection had moments before. The room was left empty, as though he had never been there at all. The hum of the bus engine filled the air as Reese sat in one of the back seats, his body tense and his hands fidgeting restlessly in his lap. The faint glow of passing streetlights flickered across his face, illuminating his anxious expression. Every few seconds, his eyes darted to the window, scanning the dark streets outside as though he expected to see shadows moving in pursuit. His fingers drummed nervously on the armrest, his knee bouncing as his thoughts spiraled. What if they find us? What if Callum's plan didn't work? His breathing quickened, and he forced himself to look down at his hands, pressing them together to steady himself. Then, out of nowhere, the person sitting next to him gasped loudly, jolting upright as though coming back to life. Reese whipped his head around, his eyes wide. "Callum?" Callum turned toward him, his chest rising and falling as though he had just surfaced from a deep dive. His face was pale but determined, his expression calm despite the intensity of what had just happened. "Did it work?" Reese asked, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. Callum leaned back in his seat, taking a moment to catch his breath. "Yeah," he said finally. "It worked." Reese's jaw dropped, his eyes filled with awe. You actually did it." Callum gave a small nod, his lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. Reese shook his head in disbelief. "Callum, that was insane. You're... I can't believe you pulled it off." After Callum left the Copper Hearth Bistro, Reese caught up to him just outside the restaurant. His steps hurried, and his face filled with concern. "Callum," Reese said, grabbing his arm to stop him. Callum turned, surprised. "What's up?" Reese hesitated, glancing around as though someone might overhear them. "I've been thinking, what if they come for us tonight? What if they know what we're planning?" Callum's brow furrowed. "You think they'll act that fast?" "I don't know," Reese admitted, his voice trembling. "But I can't shake the feeling that we're not safe here. There's a bus leaving for California tonight. We could be gone before they even realize what happened." Callum thought for a moment, his gaze distant. "You might be right," he said finally. "But if they do come for us, we need to be ready." Reese frowned, his anxiety spiking. "What do you mean? How can we possibly be ready for that?" Callum's jaw tightened as an idea began to form in his mind. "I have something in mind, but I don't know if it'll work. It's risky." "Risky?" Reese asked, his eyes widening. Callum placed a hand on his shoulder. "Trust me. Meet me at the bus station at 7 tonight. Don't ask questions, just be there." Reese hesitated, the fear in his chest warring with the trust he had in Callum. Finally, he nodded. "Okay." 7 back on the bus, the tension between Callum and Reese was palpable. Reese couldn't stop glancing at Callum, his mind racing with questions. The faint rumble of the bus engine and the occasional chatter of other passengers filled the air, but Reese's focus remained fixed on his friend. After a few moments of silence, he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Callum, what exactly did you do back there? I saw you gasping for air like you just came back from the dead. What happened?" Callum turned his head, his expression calm but tired. "It was a gamble," he admitted. "I wasn't sure it would work, but it was the only way to make sure they wouldn't keep coming after us." Reese frowned. "What do you mean?" Callum took a deep breath and leaned closer, his voice steady but quiet. "I pulled off a double projection." Reese blinked, confused. "A double projection?" Callum nodded. "It's when you project yourself twice in the same dream cycle. It's incredibly risky because I wasn't sure if it would work. I just thought of it this afternoon and easily could just be a dead body sitting in this seat now, but I didn't have a choice." Reese stared at him, still not fully understanding. "Okay, but how does that explain what happened? Walk me through it." Callum nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was listening before continuing. When I told you to meet me at the bus station, I got on the bus early, just about an hour before you got here. I fell asleep right here in this seat, and that's when I started projecting. It was my first projection. I went back to the apartment and made it look like I was packing. I knew Talon and the Abyssal Dominion might show up, so I needed to make it convincing, like I wasn't expecting them. Reese leaned back in his seat, his jaw dropping. You knew they'd try something? I suspected, Callum said, his tone grim. When they showed up, I acted as though I thought they'd found me for real. I let them do what they were planning, spike my water with melatonin. I even made my projection collapse like I'd actually fallen asleep. Reese's brow furrowed. And that's when you created the second projection? Exactly, Callum said. When my first projection fell asleep, I projected again, creating a second version of myself that stayed in the dream world. I watched everything unfold, their threats, their attempts to manipulate me, even their execution. Reese shuddered. That must have been terrifying. Callum nodded slowly. It was. But I knew I had to sell it. If they thought they'd killed me, they'd stop hunting us. Talon's arrogance worked in our favor. He's so focused on his plans that he'd believe he'd eliminated the only threat to them. So when your projection vanished? I dissolved it on purpose, Callum explained. It was part of the act. I made it look like both my projection and my real body had been destroyed. Reese let out a low whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. You pulled all of that off while they were right there? That's insane. But also I thought that when you die in your projection, you die in real life. A projection can only be killed by things conjured in the projected world, Callum explained. Talon tried to kill me with my kitchen knife. Brilliant, Reese shouted. It was the only way, Callum said, his voice quiet. If they thought I was still alive, they'd keep coming. But now they'll focus on their rebellion, not us. At least not for now. Reese ran a hand through his hair, still trying to wrap his head around it. You're either a genius or completely out of your mind. Probably both. Callum chuckled softly, though the tension in his voice was clear. Let's hope it buys us enough time to get to Mount Shasta and figure out our next move. Reese nodded, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. Yeah, let's hope. The bus hummed softly as it rolled through the quiet expanse of the countryside, its headlights cutting through the inky darkness of the night. Inside, the passengers were a mix of weary travelers and restless souls, their murmurs and occasional snores blending with the rhythm of the tires on the road. Callum sat by the window, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The faint glow of the moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light over the landscape. He traced the edges of his reflection in the glass, his thoughts far away. Beside him, Reese fidgeted with a loose thread on his sleeve, his knee bouncing anxiously. Despite everything, there was a sense of calm between them, a fragile truce with the chaos they had just escaped. For now, they were safe. Do you think it'll be enough? Reese asked quietly, breaking the silence. Callum turned to him, his expression thoughtful. I don't know, but it's the best chance we have. Reese nodded slowly, his eyes dropping to his hands. Mount Shasta. I hope it's everything I read about. It'll be more, Callum said, his voice steady. We'll figure this out, Reese. Together. Reese gave a small, hesitant smile. Yeah. Together. The two lapsed into silence again, their thoughts too heavy for words. Outside, the scenery shifted from open fields to dense woods, the towering trees casting long, ghostly shadows across the road. The bus carried them onward, its steady pace a reminder that time hadn't stopped, even though their lives had changed forever. Callum rested his head against the cool glass, his eyes half closed. The weight of everything that had happened pressed on him, but so did the spark of something else. Hope. Eldrin's teachings, the sanctum, the society. They weren't gone. Not completely. He would carry them forward. From a distance, the bus was a small beacon of light against the vast darkness, its taillights glowing faintly as it disappeared into the horizon. Inside, two unlikely companions sat side by side, their burdens heavy but their resolve unbroken. The night stretched on, vast and uncertain, but somewhere in the distance lay the promise of a new dawn, and with it, the hope of a better tomorrow.
So that is going to do it for my story, Astral, but of course, have no fear. Astral 2 will be coming, but we are going to have to wait a little while for that one. But in the meantime, we do have many more stories that will be coming your way each and every single Friday, including next week. It's the start of a new month. It's the first Friday of the month. So we'll be getting into a brand new story that I'm very excited for. It's a thriller story with a lot of conspiracies, and you just don't know what is going to happen until the very end. So I definitely recommend that you check that one out. The story will be called Utopia. Here on the Friday Night Campfire Stories YouTube channel, I make 3 full-length videos every single week. Every Monday, I do an episode of Echoes of the Past, which is my paranormal history and hauntings series. Every Wednesday is Far From Fiction, which is my true crime series. And then, of course, Fridays, the namesake of the channel, what you're witnessing here today, the Friday Night Campfire Stories. So I'd be honored if you hit that subscribe button. Also, click the like button. Share the channel with your friends and family. And as always, thank you for spending a little bit of your evening here with me.